Welcome back, everyone. Tonight we are in the territory of betrayal again, which means we are in the territory of love, because the two are not as far apart as the comfortable version of things would have them be. Every story tonight belongs to a real person who was inside a real relationship, and who discovered, at some point across the months or the years of that relationship, that the thing they had been building had a dimension they had not known about. Some of these discoveries arrived suddenly. Some arrived slowly, across the accumulation of small things that individually meant nothing, and together meant everything. Some arrived through the other person's telling, and some arrived through the evidence, and some arrived through rotes that none of the people involved had anticipated or planned for. What they all share is the honest accounting that comes after. The specific and difficult work of understanding what the relationship was, and what the discovering changed, and what the years following the discovering have required of the people who lived through it. These are not simple stories about bad people making bad decisions. They are the complicated and human stories of people who loved each other and who found themselves in inside circumstances that love alone was not sufficient to navigate, and who have been honest enough to tell the account in its full and genuine form, rather than the simpler version that the simpler account would provide. Get comfortable. These stories will take some time, and they deserve the time they take. Let's begin. The first story tonight comes from a woman who was in a relationship for 8 years, the last 3 of them married, and who discovered her husband's infidelity not at a single moment of clarity, but across a period of 6 months in which the evidence assembled itself so gradually and so quietly that she spent much of that period genuinely uncertain whether what she was seeing was what she thought she was seeing, or whether the uncertainty itself was the evidence of something she needed to examine in herself, rather than in the relationship. My husband's name is Peter, and we had been together for 8 years when I found out, 3 of them married, and I want to begin with the 6 months before the finding out, because the 6 months are the part of this account that I've spent the most time examining in the years since. And the examining has produced the understanding that the 6 months were the most significant period of the 8 years in terms of what they required of me, and what they revealed about the specific and particular way I had been inside the relationship. The 6 months began with a feeling, not a specific observation, not a piece of evidence, not a changed behavior that I could point to and name clearly as a change. A feeling, the specific and ambient quality of someone who is in a familiar place and who notices, without being able to identify what has produced the noticing, that the familiar place has a quality it did not previously have. The quality was subtle and was present in the ordinary texture of the marriage's daily life, the evenings and the meals, and the specific proximity of 2 people who have been sharing a living space for 5 years. And the subtlety was the thing that made the 6 months the 6 months, rather than the immediate confrontation that a clearer signal would have produced. Peter had not changed dramatically. This is the specific and important thing about the 6 months that I want to establish clearly, because the dramatic change is the version of this story that most people expect, and the subtle version is the version that most people actually live through. He had not become distant in the obvious way, or cold in the obvious way, or absent in the obvious way that the dramatic version of this story produces as the signal. He had become, and I'm using the word carefully because it is the most accurate word available, slightly less present in the specific moments of the evenings, slightly less engaged in the specific quality of the conversations that had been one of the most valued things of the 8 years, slightly less in the particular and individual way that someone who has known another person well and for a long time notices the slight less without always being able to name what the slight less is the less of the less. I noticed the slightly less in February, and I held it across February without raising it. because the holding produced the specific and familiar internal negotiation of someone who has been with another person for 8 years and who trusts the relationship and who is therefore disposed to examine the self before examining the relationship when something in the texture of the relationship produces the noticing. The self-examination produced the honest inventory of the specific and ordinary stressors of the period. Work, the winter's particular quality, of the confined and indoor months, the specific and individual things each of us had been carrying that the period had produced. And the inventory was sufficient to account for the slightly less in the version of the accounting that the trusting disposition produced, and I held the slightly less as the reasonable product of the period's stressors, and moved through February with the holding as the primary response. March produced a specific and first concrete observation. Peter had a colleague named James, whose name had appeared in the ordinary conversation of the marriage's daily life, with the specific and unremarkable frequency of a colleague who is present in one person's professional world without being a significant figure in the shared social world of the marriage. In March, the frequency of James's name in the ordinary conversation changed. Not dramatically, not in the direction of the obvious signal, but in the specific and subtle direction of slightly more. James appeared in the conversation slightly more often than the prior months had produced, and the appearances had a quality that the prior mentions of James had not had, which was the quality of the mentions being slightly prepared, rather than the casual and unconsidered quality of the genuinely unremarkable colleague's appearances in the ordinary conversation. I noticed the slightly more and held it alongside the slightly less without connecting the two, because the connecting required the interpretation of the two together as the evidence of something, and the interpretation required me to have arrived at a conclusion I had not arrived at and was not ready to arrive at in March. I held the slightly more and the slightly less as separate observations and continued through March, with the ordinary texture of the marriage as the primary experience and the two observations as the background of the primary experience, rather than the primary experience itself. April produced the second concrete observation. Peter's phone, which had always had the casual and unremarkable relationship to him that the casual and unremarkable phone has to someone who is not organizing the phone around the management of something that requires the managing. He had always left it in rooms he had left, had always answered it without the awareness of who was in the vicinity, had always had the phone and the specific and ambient relationship to him of someone for whom the phone was a tool rather than a guarded object. And in April, the relationship changed. Not dramatically, not the sleeping with it under the pillow, or the taking it to every room, which is the dramatic version. The ambient quality of the relationship changed in the specific and subtle way of someone who has become slightly more aware of the phone's position and the phone's screen and the phone's proximity to people who might see the screen. The awareness was new and was subtle and was the third observation alongside the slightly less and the slightly more, and the three together had a different quality from any of them individually, but still did not produce the confrontation, because the three together were still interpretable into the directions that the trusting disposition was producing as the available interpretations. And May was the month in which the accumulation crossed the threshold of the interpretable. Not through a dramatic piece of evidence, through the specific and concentrated experience of a Sunday afternoon, in which Peter and I were both home, and the specific and ordinary quality of the Sunday afternoon had a quality that was different from the prior Sunday afternoons, in a way that the prior Sunday afternoon's accumulated texture had made legible as different in a form that the individual Sunday afternoon would not have made legible on its own. Something was being managed in the Sunday afternoon. The management was not dramatic and was not visible in any specific and nameable behavior. It was the ambient quality of someone who is into the ordinary texture of a familiar situation, and who is simultaneously managing something that the ordinary texture is the cover for. And the managing had the specific and subtle quality that 5 years of Sunday afternoons with the same person had made it possible to notice as the managing. I sat with May's Sunday afternoon for 2 weeks before the conversation that the sitting eventually required. And the 2 weeks were the most difficult, 2 weeks of the 6 months, because the 2 weeks were the period in which the accumulation had crossed the threshold, without my having arrived at the willingness to act on the crossing. The accumulation was on one side of the threshold, and the trusting disposition was on the other. And the 2 weeks were the specific and difficult period of those two things being on opposite sides of the same threshold simultaneously. I raised the accumulation with Peter in the second week of May in the form I had available, which was not the form of the specific accusation. I did not have the specific evidence that the specific accusation requires, but the form of the honest description of the 6 months of the slightly less and the slightly more, and the phone's changed relationship to him, and the Sunday afternoon's managed quality. I described the 6 months as the experience rather than as the evidence, and the describing of the experience required the most careful and the most honest language I had available, because the describing of the experience in the form of the accusation would have been the describing of something I had not yet arrived at the evidence for, and the honest form was the experience's form, rather than the accusation's form. Peter received the describing with a quality that I've gone back to many times in the years since, and that I want to describe as accurately as I can, because the quality was the most informative thing the May conversation produced. He received it with the specific and concentrated quality of someone who is receiving an accurate description of something real, and who is, in the receiving, determining the response to the accurate description's accuracy. The response was not the immediate and genuine denial of someone who has been inaccurately described. The immediate and genuine denial has its own specific quality that is different from the quality of the determined response. And the quality of the determined response was what Peter's receiving had. He said I was not wrong to have noticed the period had been different. He said he had been going through something he had not known how to raise. He said the raising was overdue, and that he was sorry for the period of the not raising. The raising that he had been not raising was about James, not the James of the slightly more frequent mentions and the prepared quality of the mentions. The James whose name in the conversation I had noticed was not the full James that the raising was about. The full James was the person that the 17 months before the May conversation had been organized around in a dimension of Peter's life, that the ordinary conversation of the marriage had been the cover of, rather than the honest account of. 17 months. The 6 months of the accumulation had been the final 6 months of the 17 months of the parallel, and the parallel had been with James across the full 17 months, rather than the recent period that the 6 months of the accumulation had been pointing toward. I received the 17 months at the kitchen table in May with the specific and total quality of the complete reorganization, not the partial reorganization of the evidence that points toward something without being the complete picture, but the complete reorganization of the complete picture, arriving in the May conversation's honest account. The 8 years reorganized around the 17 months at the kitchen table, and the reorganizing produced the specific and concentrated grief and anger and disorientation of someone who has been inside a genuine and trusted relationship, and who has received the complete picture of what the genuine and trusted relationship had been alongside for 17 months. Peter ended the relationship with James in the week following the May conversation. The ending was real and was accompanied by the genuine and serious engagement with the couple's therapy that the May conversation had made the only available next step. The therapy was the container for the examination that the 8 years and the 17 months together required, and the examination was genuine and was the most honest and the most demanding engagement of the 8 years, and the examination produced the understanding of what the 17 months had been organized around in Peter's interior. the specific and long-standing dimensions of his experience of the marriage that had been producing the conditions for the parallel, without those dimensions having been raised in the marriage in the honest form that the raising would have required. And the understanding was both the most valuable and the most painful thing the examination produced. I left the marriage 14 months after the May conversation. The 14 months were the genuine and sustained attempt of someone who has 8 years of a real relationship to draw on, and who is doing the honest work of determining whether the 8 years and the examination's conclusions are the ground for the continuation. The determination produced the understanding that the examination had been genuine and had produced something real, and had not produced the foundation that the continuation required. Because the foundation the continuation required was the foundation that the 17 months and the 6 months of the accumulation and the May conversation's complete picture had changed in a way that the 14 months of the genuine work had examined but not rebuilt. The rebuilt foundation requires the time that the rebuilding requires, and the 14 months had been the time of the examination rather than the time of the rebuilding, and the examination's conclusion had been that the rebuilding required a different kind of time than the marriage had remaining. The 6 months of the accumulation are the thing I have examined most carefully in the years since the leaving, not the 17 months. The 17 months are the thing most people examine when they examine this account, because the 17 months are the dramatic thing, and the 6 months are the undramatic thing. And the dramatic thing is the expected object of the examination. But the 6 months are the thing I return to most often, because the 6 months are the period that tells me the most about myself, about the specific and particular way I had been inside the 8 years, about the trusting disposition and what the trusting disposition was made of, and what the trusting disposition was protecting alongside the genuinely good thing it was expressing, and about what the 6 months of the accumulation's careful and patient and non-confrontational holding was the honest expression of in my own interior. The 6 months were the honest expression of someone who had been inside a genuinely trusted relationship for 8 years, and who had trusted the relationship with the specific and comprehensive trust that 8 years of genuine investment produces, and who had been in the trusting, holding the self-examination in the position of the first available response to the slight departures from the ordinary texture, rather than the relationship examination that the departures were the evidence of. The trusting disposition was the genuine and good thing it was, and was also the specific and particular way I had been organized against the examining of the relationship in the direction that the accumulation was pointing. And the 6 months were the period in which those two things, the genuine trusting and the organized against examining, were both visible in their simultaneous presence in the same interior across the same 6 months. The years since the leaving have been the years of understanding both of those things honestly, and without the resolution of either into the other's account. And the understanding has been the most significant and the most lasting thing the 8 years produced for me across all of the things the 8 years produced. The 6 months of the accumulation being the most examined period of this account, more than the 17 months of the parallel, is the specific and important thing this story names. At the beginning of tonight's collection, the discovering is not always the single moment of the complete picture's arrival. It is often the 6 months of the quiet and careful and honest assembling of the picture across the ordinary texture of a relationship that is trusted, and that the trusting is both the genuine and good response to, and the specific and particular condition that the assembling has to work through, rather than around. Both things are true of the trusting, and the honest accounting of the 6 months requires both to be held, rather than only the one that is most comfortable. The next story comes from a man who had been with his partner for 4 years, and who discovered the infidelity through his partner's best friend, not through the deliberate disclosure of the third party telling that an earlier collection described. but through the specific and accidental route of overhearing a conversation he was not supposed to have been in the vicinity of, and who found that the overhearing's accidental quality produced its own specific and particular relationship to the discovering that the deliberate routes do not produce in the same form. Her name was Diane, and we had been together for 4 years, and the discovering arrived through the specific and accidental route of the overheard conversation, which is a different kind of discovering from the found evidence and the voluntary disclosure, and the third-party deliberate telling. It is the discovering that arrives without any of the parties involved having intended the arriving, and the without intention quality is the specific and important thing about it that the other routes do not have. I was at a gathering at the home of mutual friends in the 3rd year of the relationship, and I had stepped outside onto the back of the house for the specific and ordinary reason of needing a few minutes away from the gathering's noise. And Diane and her best friend Melissa were already outside in the specific conversation that the back of the house's slight remove from the gathering had provided the occasion for, and I heard the conversation before I had the time to make my presence known, and before Diane and Melissa had the opportunity to know I was present. I want to be precise about the hearing. I did not linger at the door to listen once I understood what the conversation was about. I heard enough of the conversation into the moment between my stepping outside and my stepping back inside to understand what the conversation was about, and what I heard was sufficient to produce the complete picture without the lingering that the deliberate eavesdropping would have required. What I heard was Melissa's voice saying something whose content included a name I had not heard before, and the word careful in the specific and concentrated way that careful is said when the thing being careful about is the concealment of something significant, and Diane's response to the careful, whose quality told me the something significant was significant in the specific direction that the something significant turned out to be significant in. I went back inside. The going back inside was the specific and immediate response to the understanding that I had entered a territory I had not been intended to enter, and that the territory required the time and the space that the gathering's interior was not going to provide. I spent the remainder of the gathering in the specific and unusual condition of someone who is inside the ordinary social texture of a familiar gathering, and who is also inside the complete reorganization of the relationship that the ordinary social texture is the immediate context of. And the two simultaneous conditions produce the most demanding social experience I have had in my adult life. The performing of the ordinary, while the interior was doing something entirely different from the ordinary. The drive home was silent in the way that the silence of someone who is holding something significant is different from the ordinary silence of a familiar drive home. And Diane noticed the silence's different quality in the specific and alert way of someone who has been in a conversation about the something significant in the recent past, and whose alertness to the different quality of the silence has an additional and particular edge. She asked me if I was all right. I said I was tired, which was not the dishonest answer in the sense of being the untrue answer. I was tired. The accumulation of the evening's demanding condition, having produced the genuine and specific tiredness of someone who has been managing their exterior, while their interior has been doing the most significant work of the recent period. I waited 3 days before I raised it. The 3 days were the period of the honest examination of what I had heard, and what I had understood from what I had heard, and what the raising of it required in terms of the form the raising should take. Because the overhearing's accidental quality had produced a specific and complicated relationship to the raising that the deliberate routes do not produce. The deliberate routes, the found evidence, the third-party telling, produce the confrontation from a position of clarity about what the confrontation is based on, and what the confrontation requires. The overhearing's accidental quality produced the confrontation from a position of partial information. I had heard enough to understand the direction without having heard the complete picture, and the raising required the honest accounting of what I had actually heard, rather than the claim to have heard more than I had heard. I raised it on the third evening in the specific and honest form of the partial information. I told Diane what I had heard in the exact form I had heard it, without the interpretation of what I had heard, as the complete picture that it had not yet been confirmed to be. The honest form of the partial information is the most difficult form of the raising because it requires the raising to be about the honest account of the overheard, rather than about the confrontation of the complete picture. And the honest account of the overheard is the more vulnerable form of the raising because it acknowledges the incompleteness of the information the raising is based on. Diane received the honest form of the partial information with the specific and immediate quality of someone who has been in the conversation about the something significant in the recent past, and who recognizes in the honest account of the overheard the specific and exact moment of the gathering at which the not intending had become the overhearing. She did not dispute what I had heard. She did not produce the denial that the partial information's incompleteness might have made available to her. She produced the honest and complete account of the something significant that the partial information had been the partial picture of, which told me the honest form of the raising had produced the honest form of the response, in the way that the honest form of the raising sometimes produces, when the person receiving it is in the condition of someone who has been carrying the something significant and who finds in the honest form of the raising the occasion for the putting down of the carrying that the carrying has been requiring. The something significant was a person named Daniel and a 7-month relationship, alongside the 4 years that Daniel had been the person of. The 7 months were the complete picture that the partial information had been the partial picture of, and the complete picture was clear and was unambiguous, and was the reorganization of the 4 years in the specific and total form of the complete pictures arriving. The 4 years reorganized around the 7 months in the conversation of the third evening, and the reorganizing was the specific and complete experience of the 4 years, genuine quality being held, alongside the 7 months' genuine quality simultaneously, because both had been genuine. The 4 years were the genuine thing they had been, and the 7 months were also the genuine thing they had been. And the simultaneous genuineness of both was the specific and most difficult quality of the complete pictures arriving. The accidental quality of the overhearing has been the thing I have examined most carefully in the years following the 4 years ending. The 4 years ended in the months following the third evening's conversation. The ending was the honest conclusion of the genuine attempt to determine whether the 4 years and the 7 months and the conversation could be the foundation for the continuation, and the determination produced the ending as the honest conclusion, rather than the continuation as the honest conclusion. The ending was the right ending, and has been the right ending across the years of the examination that have followed it. The accidental quality of the overhearing being the examining's object is the specific and particular thing I want to describe before this account closes. The accidental quality produced a specific and important relationship to the knowledge I had acquired, a relationship organized around the not having intended to acquire that the deliberate roots do not produce. I had not sought the information. I had not been looking for it, or building toward it, or assembling it across the months of the accumulation. It had arrived through the specific and accidental moment of the gathering's back exterior, and the conversation's ordinary casualness in the vicinity of a presence neither of the conversants had known was present. The not having intended to acquire produced in me the specific and unusual relationship to the knowledge of someone who is in possession of something they had not sought, and who is therefore in the additionally complicated position of determining not only what the knowledge means for the relationship, but what the manner of the knowledge's acquisition means for the relationship and for the raising. The determining had produced the 3 days and the honest form of the raising rather than the confrontation form. And the honest form had produced the honest response, and the honest response had produced the complete picture, and the complete picture had produced the conversation of the third evening, and the conversation of the third evening had produced the ending, and the ending has been the right ending. The accidental root had produced the right sequence of responses through the specific and particular form of the response that the accidental quality had made the most honest available response at each step of the sequence. And the sequence is the thing the years since have produced the understanding of, rather than the accidental quality's shame or the overhearing's guilt, that the more complicated relationship to the not having intended to acquire might have produced if the examining had not been done. The accidental overhearing being the specific and unusual route of this discovering, and the not having intended to acquire, producing the specific and particular relationship to the knowledge and the raising that the deliberate roots do not produce, is what this story names in the collection tonight. The honest form of the raising being the response to the accidental quality, rather than to the confrontation form, is the specific and important thing this account has named, and the honest form producing the honest response is the specific and genuine quality of what the accidental root made possible through the honest engagement with the not having intended to acquire. The next story comes from a woman who had been married for 12 years, and who discovered her husband's infidelity not through any of the conventional routes, but through the specific and unusual experience of her husband's behavior, changing in the positive direction rather than the negative, becoming more present, more attentive, and more engaged in the marriage in the specific months that the parallel had been running, and who found that the positive change had been the most disorienting quality of the discovering, because the positive change had been the thing she had been most grateful for in the period that the discovering reorganized. His name was Graham, and the 12 years had been the genuine and layered thing that 12 years of a real marriage produces, the specific and comprehensive shared life of two people who had been building something together across the full weight of the 12 years, and whose building had produced the particular and irreplaceable quality of the established and known thing. I want to say something about the 12 years before the discovering, because the 12 years are the ground of the discovering. And the ground is what makes the discovering the specific and extraordinary thing it was, rather than like the ordinary thing that the simpler account would make it. The 12 years had been good in the specific and honest sense of genuinely good, not the performed goodness of two people who are maintaining the appearance of a good marriage, while the substance of it has diminished, but the actual goodness of two people who had been genuinely building something and who had found, across the 12 years, the specific and layered intimacy of two people who know each other well and who are genuinely invested in the knowing. In the 12 years had also had the specific and ordinary quality of a long marriage's middle period, the comfortable and slightly settled quality of a thing that has been established, and that the establishing has made comfortable, and that the comfort has made slightly less examined than it was in the earlier period of the building. The slightly less examined quality is not the failure of the 12 years. It is the honest and ordinary quality of the established thing, and the honest accounting of the 12 years requires both the genuine goodness and the slightly less examined quality to be held simultaneously. In the 10th year, the slightly less examined quality had been producing in me the specific and honest awareness of a distance between Graham and me that was not dramatic and was not the signal of anything specific, but was the ambient quality of two people who have been inside the ordinary, comfortable texture of a long marriage for long enough that the texture has become the primary experience, rather than the relationship being the texture's ground. I had noticed this and had raised it with Graham in the honest and careful form of someone describing an experience rather than making a claim. and the raising had produced the genuine response of someone who had also been noticing the same quality and who had received the raising as the occasion for the honest engagement with the quality rather than the defensiveness of the denial. The year following the raising had been the year of the most deliberately engaged and the most genuinely present version of the 12 years that the 12 years had produced. Graham had been more present across the 11th year in the specific and genuine ways that the raising had identified as the wanted presence, more attentive in the evenings, more engaged in the conversations that the settled quality had been making less engaged, more deliberate in the specific and particular expressions of care that the long marriage's comfortable texture had been making less deliberate. The 11th year had been the most genuinely alive version of the 12 years, and I had received it with the specific and genuine gratitude of someone who has raised an honest concern and received the honest and engaged response that the concern had been looking for. The discovering arrived in the 12th year through the specific and ordinary route of the found evidence. Graham's laptop, open on the table, a conversation visible on the screen, in the accidental way of the screen's not having been closed before the leaving of the room. The conversation was with a woman named Philippa, and the conversation's content was unambiguous in the way of the content. That is what it is from the first reading, and does not require the interpretation that the ambiguous evidence requires. I stood in front of the laptop for a long time before I moved. What the standing was the specific and suspended quality that the total and immediate discovering produces. The complete picture arriving into accidental visibility of the screen's open conversation. The 12 years reorganizing around the complete picture in the specific and immediate way of the total reorganization, rather than the accumulated reorganization of the 6 months of the slowly assembling evidence. The standing lasted long enough for the complete picture to be fully received, and for the first and most disorienting quality of the complete picture to arrive, which was not the grief or the anger. Those arrived later and were genuine and were real, but the specific and extraordinary quality of the complete picture's timing. The timing was the disorienting thing. In the 11th year, the year of the most genuinely alive and the most deliberately engaged version of the 12 years, had been, by the conversation's dates, the year in which the parallel with Philippa had been running. The most present and the most attentive and the most deliberately caring version of Graham across the 12 years had been running alongside the parallel rather than instead of it. The positive change that I had received as the genuine response to the honest raising, the presence and the attentiveness and the deliberate care of the 11th year, had been the genuine response to the honest raising, and had also been occurring in the same year as the parallel, and the two things had been simultaneously true across the full 11th year, without the simultaneity having been visible to me from the inside of the genuine gratitude the 11th year had produced. I sat with this for a week before the confrontation. The week was not the preparation of the confrontation. It was the specific and necessary period of sitting with the timing's disorienting quality before the conversation that the disorienting quality required the full processing of before it was possible to have the conversation about it honestly. The disorienting quality was the most significant and the most demanding thing the finding had produced, because it was the quality that most comprehensively reorganized the 11 year, not only the 12 years being reorganized around the parallel's existence, which is the ordinary reorganization that the conventional discovering produces, but the most valued year of the 12 being reorganized around the parallel's simultaneous presence, which is the additional and more comprehensive reorganization that the timing had produced. The confrontation happened on the 8th day. Graham received it with the specific and genuine quality of someone for whom the finding's root, the open laptop, the visible conversation, had been the accidental and genuine finding rather than the finding he had anticipated or prepared for, and whose reception, therefore, had the quality of the genuine and total arriving of something that had not been prepared for, in the form it arrived in. He confirmed Philippa and confirmed the 11 months of the parallel, and confirmed that the 11 months had been running across the 11th year that had been the most present and the most deliberately engaged year of the 12. He said something in the confrontation that has been the thing I've examined most carefully in the years since, and I want to reproduce the substance of it as honestly as I can, because the substance is the specific and important thing that the examination has been organized around. He said the 11th year's presence and attentiveness had been genuine, had been the genuine response to the honest raising, the genuine engagement with what the raising had identified as the wanted qualities of the marriage's continuation. Now, he said the parallel with Philippa had also been genuine, had been the genuine expression of a different and specific dimension of his experience that the marriage's context had not been producing in the same form. He said the two genuine things had been simultaneously present across the 11th year, without either of them canceling the other's genuineness, and that the simultaneity had been the specific and most serious failure of the 11th year, not the choosing of one over the other, which would have been the honest response to the simultaneity, but the maintaining of both simultaneously, rather than the honest engagement with the simultaneity's requirement of the choice. The maintaining of both simultaneously being the specific and most serious failure, rather than the parallel's existence being the most serious failure, is the thing I have examined most carefully in the years since, and the thing the examination has produced the clearest understanding of. The parallel's existence is the dramatic thing, and is the thing the simpler account of the discovering organizes itself around as the most serious failure. The maintaining of both simultaneously without the honest engagement with the simultaneity's requirement is the less dramatic thing, and is the more specific and the more serious failure in the honest accounting of the 12 years. Because the maintaining of both simultaneously required the sustained and daily choice, across the full 11 months of the 11th year, to not raise the honest engagement with the simultaneity that the simultaneity required, and the sustained and daily choice not to raise it is the 11 months of the parallel's most serious quality. The marriage ended in the months following the confrontation. The ending was genuine and was the honest conclusion of the specific and careful examination of whether the 12 years and the 11th year's complete picture could be the ground for the continuation. The examination produced the understanding that the complete picture had changed the 12 years in the specific and comprehensive way of the timing's disorienting quality. Not only the parallel's existence, but the most valued year's simultaneous and complete reorganization. And the changing had produced something in the foundation of the 12 years, that the months of the genuine examination had examined rather than rebuilt, and the rebuilding required more than the months had produced the conditions for. The 11th year, being the most examined thing of the 12 years, rather than the parallel itself, is the honest account of where the years following the discovering have arrived. The 11th year and its simultaneous qualities, the genuine presence and the genuine parallel, the real engagement with the raising and the real maintaining of both simultaneously, is the specific and most demanding territory of the 12 years' honest accounting, and the demanding quality of that territory is the specific and ongoing work of the years since the confrontation, rather than the concluded work of the period that the confrontation contained. The positive change being the most disorienting quality of this discovering, and the most valued year, being the year of the simultaneous and complete reorganization, is the specific and unusual thing this story names in tonight's collection. The simultaneity of the genuine presence and the genuine parallel across the same year is the specific and extraordinary quality of this version of the discovering, and the maintaining of both simultaneously being the most serious failure rather than the parallel's existence. Being the most serious failure is the specific and important distinction that the honest examination of the 11th year has produced, and that this account has been trying to name with the precision the distinction deserves. The next story comes from a man who had been in a relationship for 3 years and who discovered his partner's infidelity and who found that the most significant and the most lasting dimension of the discovering's aftermath was not anything about the relationship or the partner or the parallel, but the specific and unexpected relationship to his own father that the discovering had produced. Dasi, because the discovering had arrived at the specific and concentrated moment when his father had been the person he had most needed, and his father had been the person whose response to the discovering had reorganized the relationship with the father in ways that the discovering's own reorganization of the relationship with the partner had not anticipated and had not prepared him for. Her name was Sophie, and we had been together for 3 years, and the discovering arrived in the second year through the specific and direct route of Sophie telling me the voluntary disclosure of someone who had been inside the parallel for 4 months and who had arrived at the honest recognition that the 4 months required the disclosure as the honest response to the 4 months wait, rather than the continuation of the carrying. The disclosure was genuine, and the account Sophie provided of the 4 months was honest and complete. And the disclosure and the account together produced the standard territory of the discovering's immediate aftermath, the grief and the anger, and the specific and total reorganization of the 3 years around the 4 months complete picture. I want to describe the immediate aftermath's standard territory briefly before I get to the specific and non-standard thing this account is organized around, because the standard territory is the honest ground of the non-standard thing, and the non-standard thing is not understandable without the standard territory as its ground. The grief was genuine and proportionate to the 3 years. The anger was genuine and proportionate to the 4 months. The reorganization was complete and immediate in the specific way of the total discovering rather than the accumulated discovering. All of this is the honest account of the immediate aftermath's standard territory and is the ground of what I am about to describe. I called my father the day after Sophie's disclosure. This is the specific and ordinary thing that the immediate aftermath of a significant discovering produces in many people. The reaching toward the people who are most trusted and most central into the life outside the relationship. The people whose presence in the discovering's aftermath is sought as a specific and particular support that the discovering requires. My father had been the person in my life whose support I had sought in the significant moments of the adult life preceding the 3 years with Sophie. The person whose particular quality of engaged and honest presence I had found most stabilizing in the periods that had required the stabilizing. I called him the day after the disclosure with a specific and honest expectation of the engaged and honest presence that the prior significant moments had produced. My father's response to the disclosure's account was not the engaged and honest presence I had been seeking. It was a different and specific quality. The quality of someone who has received significant information about another person's relationship and who is organizing the response to the information around the frame that information has activated in his own interior, rather than around the frame that the person calling him is inside. The frame my father's response was organized around was the frame of the cheated on person's complicity, the specific and particular perspective that the discovering of partner's infidelity produces the occasion for the examination of what the discovering person had been doing or not doing or being or not being that had produced the conditions for the parallel. My father did not say this directly, so he said it in the specific and indirect form of questions that were organized around the frame, without stating the frame. Questions about the quality of the relationship in the prior months, about the specific and particular things I had been giving to and receiving from the 3 years, about whether there had been things I had been aware of that I had not been attending to. The questions were not hostile and were not cruel, and were not the deliberate articulation of the frame. They were the genuine questions of someone whose interior response to the discovering was organized around the frame that the discovering had activated in his own relational history. which I did not know the specifics of at the time of the call, and which I have come to understand better in the years since. I received the questions with the specific and concentrated quality of someone who has called for the engaged and honest presence, and who is receiving the questions organized around the complicity frame in the immediate aftermath of the discovering's grief and anger. The receiving produced something in me that the discovering itself had not produced. The specific and concentrated experience of the seeking of support from the most trusted person, and the receiving of something that the seeking had not been organized around, which is a different and in some ways more disorienting experience than the discovering itself in the specific moment of the most acute need that the discovering had produced. The call ended without the engaged and honest presence I had sought, and with the questions frame as the primary quality of the call's aftermath. I sat with the call's aftermath alongside the discovering's aftermath for several days before I was able to examine either of them clearly enough to understand what each of them was and what each of them required. The examining produced the specific and important understanding that the two aftermaths were separate things requiring separate examination, rather than the single and combined aftermath that the days of holding them together had been producing. And the separation of the two aftermaths was the beginning of the clear examination of each. The discovering's aftermath, Sophie's disclosure, and the 4 months and the 3 years reorganization required the examination and produced the understanding that the 3 years had been genuine and that the 4 months had been the parallel, that the disclosure had been the honest response to, and that the honest response to the discovering was the ending of the relationship, rather than the continuation, which was the specific and clear conclusion of the examining. The relationship ended in the weeks following the call, and the ending was the right ending, and has been the right ending across the years since. The call's aftermath was the more significant and the more lasting of the two aftermaths, which is the honest and perhaps surprising account of where the years since have arrived. And the call had reorganized the relationship with my father in a way that the discovering had not anticipated, and that the discovering's immediate aftermath had not prepared me for. And the reorganizing had produced the most significant and the most demanding examination of the years since, the examination of the relationship with my father, and what the call had revealed about the relationship with my father, and what the relationship with my father required, in the honest accounting of the call's quality, and what the call's quality had produced. I raised the call with my father 6 months after the discovering. The raising was the most difficult raising I had done in the relationship with my father across the adult life. The specific and concentrated difficulty of raising something with the person whose support had been most sought and most trusted, and whose response to the most acute seeking had been the thing the raising was about. The raising was in the honest and careful form of the describing of the experience, rather than the accusation. I described what I had sought and what I had received, and the specific quality of the gap between the seeking and the receiving, in the form that the honest describing of an experience provides, rather than the form that the accusation of someone's failure provides. My father received the raising with a quality that the 6 months of the examination had not fully anticipated. The quality of genuine recognition and genuine regret of someone who has been given the honest account of something their response had produced in another person, and who is encountering the production for the first time in a form that makes it visible as the production it had been. He said he had not known his questions had been organized around the frame that the raising was describing. He said the frame had been running in his own interiors, response to the discovering without his having examined the frame's origins or its appropriateness to the specific situation of the person who had been calling him. He said the frame had origins in his own relational history, that the call had activated without his awareness of the activation, and the origins were the specific and honest account of something in his own interior, that the raising had produced the occasion for the examining of. The conversation that the raising produced was the most significant and the most genuine exchange in the relationship with my father across the adult years, and the most significant and the most genuine exchange had been produced through the specific and unexpected route of the discovering's aftermath. The Sophie dimension had been the occasion for the conversation with my father, that the relationship with my father had been requiring without having had the occasion for. The discovering had produced, alongside the standard territory of the discovering's own aftermath, the specific and non-standard gift of the conversation with my father, that the relationship with my father had needed, and that the discovering's acute moment had made possible as the occasion for the seeking that had produced the call, that had produced the raising, that had produced the conversation. The relationship with my father and the years since the conversation has been the most genuinely honest and the most present version of the relationship that the adult years have contained, and the most present version has been the version that the discovering's root had produced through the specific and non-standard sequence of the call and the raising and the conversation. The Sophie dimension of the 3 years ended at the 3-year mark and has been the honest and concluded thing of the years since. The father dimension has been the ongoing and developing thing of the years since, and the ongoing and developing quality of the father dimension is the specific and non-standard gift that the discovering standard territory had produced through the specific and unexpected root of the call and what the call had made possible through its own particular and difficult quality. The father dimension being the most significant and the most lasting thing this discovering produced, rather than the relationship's ending or the 4 months' honest accounting, is the specific and non-standard thing this story names in tonight's collection. The discovering producing the occasion for the most significant exchange in a different and separate relationship is the unusual quality of this account, and the unusual quality being the honest and genuine account of what the discovering's aftermath most significantly produced, is the thing that the standard territory of the discovering's examination would not have arrived at without the non-standard dimension's honest naming. The next story comes from a woman who had been in a relationship for 5 years and who discovered her partner's infidelity, and who found, in the specific and concentrated experience of the discovering's immediate aftermath, that the person she most needed to speak with was the person she had the most complicated and the most fraught relationship with in her life outside the relationship, her mother, and who found that the discovering had produced the unexpected and specific occasion for the most honest conversation with her mother that the full adult life had contained, and that the honest conversation had been more significant and more lasting than the discovering that had produced it. His name was Alex, and the 5 years had been the genuine and developing thing of a relationship that had been building steadily and with the specific and honest quality of 2 people who were genuinely invested in the building. And the discovering arrived in the 4th year through the specific and ordinary route of the found evidence, a message on Alex's phone that I had been handed to look at a photograph, and that had been visible in the handling in the accidental and immediate way of the accidental visibility, and the message's content had been the complete and immediate picture rather than the partial picture requiring the interpretation. The complete and immediate picture had produced the complete and immediate reorganization of the 4 years, and the confrontation had happened the same evening, and Alex had confirmed the complete picture and provided the fuller account of the 7 months that the message had been the partial visibility of. I want to move quickly through the standard territory of this discovering, because the standard territory is the ground, and the specific and non-standard thing is the account. The 7 months and the confrontation and the confirmation and the genuine attempt at the examination of whether the continuation was possible. All of this is the honest account of the standard territory and is the ground of the non-standard thing. The relationship ended 8 months after the discovering, which was the honest conclusion of the 8 months of the genuine attempt. And the ending was the right ending, and has been the right ending across the years since. The non-standard thing arrived in the week following the confrontation through this specific and particular route of needing to tell someone. And the needing to tell someone is the ordinary and human response to the discovering significant and acute weight. The reaching toward the people whose presence is most sought in the significant and acute moments of the life. I had been reaching toward the people in my life whose presence I most sought in the significant and acute moments. And the reaching had produced the conversations with friends whose support had been genuine and whose presence had been the honest and engaged quality of genuine friendship's response to the significant and acute moment. The reaching had not included my mother. My mother had not been the person I reached toward in the significant and acute moments of the adult life, which is the specific and honest account of the relationship with my mother, that the 5 years of the relationship with Alex had been the context of, rather than the account of. The relationship with my mother had been the complicated and fraught and genuine relationship of two people who loved each other and who had been in the specific and long-standing difficulty of two people whose particular and individual ways of being in the world had been producing the friction and the distance that the complicated and fraught relationship had been the expression of across the full adult life. The not reaching toward was the honest expression of the complicated and fraught relationship, rather than the failure of either person's love for the other, or and the honest accounting of the not reaching toward requires both the honest expression and the genuine love to be held simultaneously. My mother called me in the second week after the confrontation, not in response to anything I had told her. She had not known about the discovering, the not reaching toward having produced the not telling that the not reaching toward produces. She called in the specific and ordinary way of a mother who calls periodically, in the routine of the relationship's maintenance, and the calling produced the specific and concentrated quality of someone who is into the acute aftermath of a significant discovering and who is receiving the routine call of the complicated and fraught relationship, and who is, in the receiving, in the simultaneous condition of the acute aftermath and the routine call's ordinary demands. I told her. The telling was not the planned telling of someone who had determined that the conversation with the mother was the right response to the discovering. It was the specific and unplanned telling of someone who is into the acute aftermath and who is in the receiving of a call from the person whose love is real and whose presence is complicated and fraught, and who finds in the receiving that the acute aftermath has produced the condition in which the not telling is less available than the telling because the acute aftermath's weight has made the ordinary management of the not telling in the complicated and fraught relationship unavailable in the form it is usually available in. My mother's response to the telling was not the response I had expected from the complicated and fraught relationship's history. The complicated and fraught relationship's history had produced specific expectations about the forms that my mother's responses to significant information about my life took, the specific and particular qualities of the response that the long-standing difficulty had been the expression of across the adult life, the qualities that had been producing the not reaching toward as the honest response to those qualities. The response to the telling was none of those qualities. It was a different and specific and genuine quality, the quality of someone who has received significant information about their child's acute difficulty and who is responding from the most honest and the most present version of the love rather than from the complicated and fraught relationship's ordinary dynamics. She said something in the response whose substance I want to describe as honestly as I can, because the substance is the specific and important thing that the years since have been organized around. In terms of the relationship with my mother, she said she had been in a version of the discovering I was describing in her own life, not the exact version, not the same circumstances, but the specific and particular experience of a discovering inside a significant relationship that had reorganized the relationship and produced the specific and acute aftermath that she recognized in what I was describing. She had not told me this before. The telling of it in response to my telling of the Alex discovering was the first time the most significant discovering of her own relational life had been present in the shared space between us in the honest form of its genuine content, rather than in the managed form that the complicated and fraught relationship had been the container for. The conversation that followed was the longest and the most honest and the most present conversation of the full adult life with my mother. The discovering had produced the occasion for the conversation, in the specific way that the acute aftermath's removal of the ordinary management had produced the condition for the telling, and the telling had produced the condition for my mother's telling, and the mutual telling had produced the conversation that the complicated and fraught relationship had been requiring without having had the occasion for across the full adult life. The occasion had been produced by the discovering's acute aftermath, removing the ordinary management that the complicated and fraught relationship had been the expression of in both of us simultaneously. The acute aftermath had been the condition in which the ordinary management was least available, and in which the most honest and the most present version of the love had been most available. And the most honest and the most present version of the love had produced the conversation. The relationship with Alex ended at the 8-month mark in the honest way of an honest ending, and has been the concluded and examined thing of the years since. Or the relationship with my mother has been the ongoing and developing thing of the years since. And the developing quality of the relationship with my mother is the most significant and the most lasting thing that Alex discovering produced alongside the ending. The 5 years with Alex and the discovering's aftermath had produced, through the specific and unexpected route of the routine call, and the unplanned telling, and the mutual telling, and the conversation, the most significant revision of the relationship with my mother that the full adult life had contained. And the revision has been the ongoing and developing work of the years since, rather than the concluded work of the conversation that had begun it. The Alex dimension of the 5 years is held honestly as the genuine and concluded thing it is. The mother dimension of the discovering's aftermath is held as the ongoing and developing thing it is. Both are held simultaneously in the honest accounting of what the 5 years and the discovering produced, and the both held simultaneously is the most honest available relationship to all of it. The mother dimension being the most significant and the most lasting thing this discovering produced, and the routine call's unplanned occasion being the specific and unexpected route through which the most honest conversation of the full adult life with the mother had arrived, is the specific and non-standard thing this story names in tonight's collection. The discovering removing the ordinary management of the complicated and fraught relationship, and producing in that removal the condition for the most honest and the most present version of the love is the specific and important quality of this account, and the quality is the honest account of what the discovering's acute aftermath can produce when the acute aftermath's removal of the ordinary management coincides with the most significant relationship outside the discovering's immediate territory, being the relationship whose ordinary management the removal makes most available to be set aside. The next story comes from a man who had been with his partner for 6 years and who discovered the infidelity in the specific and unusual form of discovering it twice, first in year 3 and then again in year 5, and after a period of genuine and sustained repair that he had believed had produced the rebuilt foundation the continuation required, and who found that the second discovering was categorically different from the first in the specific and important ways that the second discovering of something you believed had been genuinely addressed always is. Her name was Claire, and we had been together for 6 years, and the two discoverages are the specific and central thing this account is organized around, and I want to describe both of them with the honest precision they deserve, rather than collapsing them into the single narrative that the simpler account would produce. They are not the same discovering told twice. They are two genuinely different discoverages that happen to involve the same person and the same relationship, and the difference between them is the specific and important thing the years since have produced the understanding of. The first discovering arrived in year 3 through the specific and direct route of Claire telling me. The telling was the voluntary disclosure of genuine remorse, the specific and organized quality of someone who has been inside a parallel, and who has arrived at the recognition that the parallel and the relationship cannot continue simultaneously, and that the honest response to the recognition is the disclosure rather than the management of the two simultaneous things through the continued not telling. Claire had been in a parallel with a man named Tom for 5 months, and the disclosure was the ending of the parallel and the beginning of the honest engagement with what the parallel had been and what it had produced in the relationship, and what the relationship required in the honest response to the parallel's existence. The first discovering standard territory was genuine and was difficult, and was the specific and total reorganization of the 3 years around the 5 months in the way that the complete and immediate picture produces the total reorganization. The grief and the anger were genuine and proportionate, and were the honest responses to the genuine and complete picture. The couple's therapy was the container for the genuine examination that the 3 years and the 5 months required, and the examination produced the honest accounting of what the 5 months had been organized around in Claire's interior, and what the 3 years had been producing in the relationship that the parallel had been the expression of. The examination was genuine, and the accounting was honest, and the work that the examination required was done across the full year of the therapy. The first discovering produced, at the end of the year of the therapy, the specific and genuine understanding that the examination had produced the rebuilt foundation, that the 3 years and the 5 months into the year of the therapy had together produced the honest and examined version of the relationship that the unexamined version had not been, and that the honest and examined version was the ground for the continuation. I believed this. The believing was not the naive believing of someone who had not done the work. It was the genuine and evidence-based believing of someone who had been in the most demanding and the most honest examination of the 3 years, and who had found in the examination's conclusion the specific and genuine evidence that the work had produced the rebuilt foundation. The believing was the honest response to the evidence the examination had produced. The continuation from the first discovering's year of therapy was the continuation of the rebuilt and examined version of the relationship, and the continuation produced 2 years that were genuinely the most present and the most honest version of the 6 years that the 6 years had contained. The 2 years following the first discovering were not the ordinary comfortable texture of the pre-discovering relationship. They were the deliberately examined and deliberately present version of 2 people who had been through the most demanding engagement of the relationship, and who had found, in the engagement's conclusion, the specific and genuine foundation that the engagement had made possible. The 2 years were the evidence of the rebuilt foundation's genuine quality, and I held the 2 years as the evidence and moved through them with the specific and genuine quality of someone who has done the work and who is inside the work's most genuine production. The second discovering arrived in year 5 through the specific and ordinary route of the found evidence, a conversation on Claire's phone that I encountered in the accidental and unremarkable way of the accidental visibility, and the conversation's content was the complete and immediate picture in the way of the content. That is what it is from the first reading. The conversation was with a different person, not Tom, whose parallel had been the first discovering's territory, but a man named David, whose parallel had been running, by the conversation's dates, for 3 months of the 2 years of the rebuilt and examined version of the relationship. I want to describe the specific quality of the second discovering as it arrived, because the quality is the thing that most distinguishes the second discovering from the first, and that the years since have produced the clearest understanding of. The first discovering had arrived with the full weight of the total and immediate reorganization, the grief and the anger and the disorientation of the complete pictures, arriving in a relationship that the prior trust had not prepared for the complete picture. The second discovering arrived with a different quality, not the grief and the anger and the disorientation of the unprepared, but the specific and concentrated quality of someone who has been through the total reorganization before and who is now in the second total reorganization with the specific and additional weight of the first reorganization's work being present in the second reorganization's territory. The additional weight is the specific and important quality of the second discovering that the first discovering does not contain. The first discovering reorganizes the prior relationship around the parallel. The second discovering reorganizes the prior relationship and the year of the therapy and the rebuilt foundation and the 2 years of the rebuilt and examined version simultaneously around the new parallel. And the simultaneity of the reorganization is more comprehensive and more demanding than the first discovering's reorganization, because it includes the work of the first discovering's response as the territory of the second discovering's reorganization. The year of the therapy and the genuine examination and the rebuilt foundation, and the 2 years of the most present version. All of this is reorganized alongside the 3 years and the 2 years around the 3 months of the David parallel, and the reorganizing of the work alongside the relationship is the specific and additional weight that makes the second discovering the categorically different thing from the first. I sat with the second discovering for 4 days before the confrontation. The 4 days were the specific and necessary period of the most significant and the most demanding interior work I had done in the 6 years. The work of being inside the second discovering's complete and immediate picture, while simultaneously holding the first discovering's work and the rebuilt foundation, and the 2 years of the most present version in the second discovering's full weight. The 4 days produced the specific and honest understanding that the second discovering required before the confrontation, which was the understanding that the confrontation was not the beginning of the examination. The confrontation was the end of the examination, and the examination had been the 4 days, and the 4 days had produced the conclusion before the confrontation, rather than across the months of the therapy that the first discovering had required to produce its conclusion. The confrontation happened on the 4th evening. Claire received it with a quality that was different from the first discovering's confrontation, in the specific and important way that the second confrontation is different from the first. Not the quality of someone who has arrived at the disclosure through the genuine and remorseful recognition that the parallel and the relationship cannot continue simultaneously, but the quality of someone who is receiving a confrontation that has arrived before the disclosure and who is into the specific and additional difficulty of receiving the second confrontation with the first confrontation's genuine work as the shared and known history of the conversation's territory. She confirmed David and confirmed the 3 months and provided the account of the 3 months that the confrontation required, and the account was honest and was the complete picture of the 3 months that the found evidence had been the partial picture of. She said something in the account that was different from anything the first discovering's confrontation had produced, and the something was the honest account of a dimension of her interior that the year of the therapy had examined without having arrived at the specific and deepest version of what the examination was examining. She said the year of the therapy had produced the genuine and real examination of the 5 months with Tom, and the relationship's conditions that had produced the 5 months, and had not produced the examination of the specific and deeper dimension of her interior that had been the organizing principle beneath the conditions, the dimension that the 5 months had been the expression of, and that the 3 months with David had also been the expression of, and that the therapy had been circling without having reached the specific and deepest level that the organizing principle was operating at. The something she was describing was the honest account of a dimension of her relating that the first discoverings therapy had examined at the level of the conditions, rather than at the level of the organizing principle beneath the conditions, and the organizing principle beneath the conditions was the thing that the 3 months with David had been the evidence of having not been reached by the therapy's examination. The therapy had reached the conditions and had rebuilt the foundation on the examined conditions rather than on the examined organizing principle, and the foundation built on the examined conditions rather than the examined organizing principle was the rebuilt foundation that the 2 years of the most present version had been standing on, and that the 3 months with David had been the evidence of the foundation's specific and remaining vulnerability. I ended the relationship the week following the confrontation. The ending was clear and was the honest conclusion of the 4 days of the interior work and the confrontation's account, and the something that had been the most honest and the most significant thing Claire had produced across the 6 years, and that had arrived in the second discovering's confrontation rather than the first. The ending was right and has been right across the years since. The specific and important thing the years since have produced the understanding of is the distinction between the examined conditions and the examined organizing principle, which is the distinction that the first discoverings therapy had not been able to make at the level of depth the distinction required. The therapy had been genuine, and the examination had been genuine, and the rebuilt foundation had been the genuine product of the genuine examination, and the genuine examination had reached the conditions rather than the organizing principle, and the rebuilt foundation on the examined conditions rather than the examined organizing principle had been the specific and remaining vulnerability that the 3 months with David had been the expression of. Yet the distinction is not the criticism of the therapy or the first discovering's genuine work. It is the honest accounting of the level of depth the examination had reached, and the level of depth that the organizing principle had required, and that the therapy had not had the time or the specific focus to reach before the 2 years of the rebuilt version had been the standing on the foundation the therapy had built. The second discovering being the categorically different thing from the first, and the additional weight of the first discovering's work being reorganized alongside the relationship in the second discovering's territory, is the specific and important thing this story names in tonight's collection. The distinction between the examined conditions and the examined organizing principle is the specific and honest understanding that the 6 years and the 2 discoverages and the years of the examination since have produced, and the producing of that understanding is the most significant and the most lasting thing the 6 years contained. The next story comes from a woman who had been married for 9 years and who discovered her husband's infidelity, and who found that the most significant dimension of the aftermath was not the discovering itself or the ending of the marriage, which happened and which was the right ending, but the specific and unexpected relationship that developed between her and her husband's mother in the months following the discovering, a relationship that had been formal and pleasant and unremarkable for the 9 years of the marriage, and that became, in the months of the discovering's aftermath, the most honest and the most significant relationship outside her immediate family that the adult years had produced. My husband's name was Robert, and his mother's name is Eleanor, and the 9 years of the marriage had been the 9 years in which Eleanor and I had been in this specific and comfortable relationship of a daughter-in-law and a mother-in-law who genuinely liked each other and who had been inside the genuine liking's comfortable and pleasant expression across the 9 years, without the comfortable and pleasant expression having ever required or produced the more honest and the more present version of the relationship that the comfortable and pleasant expression sufficiency had made unnecessary. In the 9 years of the comfortable and pleasant version had been good and had been genuine in their comfortable and pleasant form, and had not been the deeper and more present version that the comfortable and pleasant form was the sufficient and unremarkable cover of. The discovering arrived in year 8 through the specific and ordinary route of the found evidence. I will not describe the route in detail, because the route is not the significant part of this account. The significant part begins in the week following the confrontation with Robert, in the specific and particular moment of Eleanor's call. Eleanor called me 5 days after the confrontation. I do not know how she knew. Robert may have told her, or she may have known in this specific and alert way, that a mother who knows her child well sometimes knows the significant things about the child's life before the telling has made the knowing official. She called, and she said she had heard and that she was calling because she wanted me to know that she was sorry, and that the sorry was the genuine and specific sorry of someone who is in the specific and complicated position of being the mother of the person who has done the discoverings thing and who is also the person who has been in the relationship with the discoverings recipient across the 9 years, and who has found in the discoverings event the specific and concentrated quality of the two positions being simultaneously present in the same call. The two positions being simultaneously present in Eleanor's call is the specific and important quality of this account's non-standard territory, because the two positions produce in Eleanor a specific and unusual relationship to the discovering's aftermath that the single position does not produce. She was the mother of the person who had done the thing. The love and the grief and the complicated position of someone who loves the person who has done the thing, and who is therefore inside the discovering's reorganization from a different and more complicated position than the discovering's direct territory. She was also the person who had been in the 9-year relationship with me. The genuine and comfortable liking of the 9 years, and the specific and honest care for me that the 9 years had produced in the comfortable and pleasant form, and that the discoverings event had produced the occasion for the more honest and the more present version of. The call produced the first genuinely honest exchange of the 9 years of the relationship with Eleanor. The first conversation in which the comfortable and pleasant form had been set aside by the discovering's weight, and the weight's setting aside of the ordinary management that the comfortable and pleasant form had been. The genuine and honest exchange was brief in the call's form, and was the beginning of the more extended and more honest exchange that the months following the call would produce. I want to describe the months following the call in the honest form of what the months actually were, rather than the simplified version that the simplified account would produce, because the simplified version would either be the account of Eleanor's betrayal of Robert through the relationship with me, or the account of the sentimental and uncomplicated connection of two women joined by the discovering's common territory. And neither of those simplified versions is the accurate account of what the months actually were. The months were more complicated and more genuine than either simplified version, and require the honest description that the month's complexity deserves. Eleanor and I met 3 weeks after the call in the specific and deliberate way of two people who have had the first honest exchange, and who have determined in the time between the call and the meeting that the meeting is the honest next step, rather than the return to the comfortable and pleasant form that the 9 years had been. The meeting was at a coffee shop in the specific and neutral territory of a place that was not the family home and not my home, and that was therefore the meeting's own territory, rather than either of theirs. We spent 2 hours in the most honest and the most genuine exchange that the 9 years of the relationship had contained. Eleanor told me things about Robert that the 9 years of the marriage had not told me, which is both the specific and the sensitive thing I want to describe carefully, because the telling of a child's things by a mother is the complicated and fraught territory of a loyalty that the telling is complicating. Eleanor was not betraying Robert through the telling. She was providing the honest accounting of specific and relevant things about Robert's interior and Robert's history that the 9 years of the marriage had not produced the conditions for the honest accounting of, and whose honest accounting was relevant to the understanding of the 9 years, and the discovering in a way that the understanding deserved. The telling was organized around the honest accounting rather than to the betrayal. And the distinction between those two things is the specific and important thing the 2 hours required to maintain clearly. What Eleanor told me was the specific and honest account of dimensions of Robert's interior that his history had produced, and that the 9 years of the marriage had been the context of, rather than the territory of the honest engagement with, and whose honest engagement with required more than the 9 years had produced the conditions for. The dimensions were the specific and particular things about the way Robert related to the most significant relationships of his life, the specific and individual patterns of his relating that the history had produced, and that the 9 years had been the most recent and the most significant expression of. The accounting was not the excuse of the discovering. The patterns and their history are not the excuse of the thing they produce. And Eleanor was not offering them as the excuse. She was offering them as the honest account that the 9 years of the comfortable and pleasant form had not made available, and whose availability the discoverings event had produced the occasion for. I received the 2 hours honest accounting with the specific and genuine quality of someone who is receiving significant and relevant information about the 9 years, and the discovering from the position most able to provide the honest account, the mother who has known Robert across the full life, rather than the 9 years of the marriage, and whose knowing of the full life has produced the honest account of the dimensions that the 9 years alone could not have produced the honest account of. The receiving was the most significant 2 hours of the 9 years' territory, and produced the most comprehensive understanding of the 9 years that the 9 years had contained. The marriage ended in the months following the meeting. The ending was the right ending, and was produced by the honest examination of the 9 years, and the discovering's complete picture, and the 2 hours honest accounting together, and the right ending was clear, and has been clear across the years since. Robert and I ended in this specific and honest way of an honest ending, and the ending has been the concluded and examined thing of the years since. Eleanor and I have continued. Laddie, this is the specific and perhaps surprising element of this account that most people find most unusual, and I want to account for it with the honest precision it deserves, rather than leaving it as the surprising detail without the account. The 2 hours had produced the beginning of the more honest and the more present version of the relationship with Eleanor that the 9 years of the comfortable and pleasant form had not produced. And the more honest and the more present version had been the most genuine and the most valuable relationship outside my immediate family that the adult years had produced across the 9 years. The continuing of that relationship following the marriage's ending was the honest response to the genuine and valuable quality of the more honest and the more present version, rather than the complication that the external account of the continuing might imply. The continuing is not organized around Robert, and is not the mediated or the complicated version of the continuing that the external account might expect. Eleanor and I are in the specific and genuine relationship of two people who found each other through the extraordinary circumstances of the discovering's aftermath, and who have found, in the years since the extraordinary circumstances, that the relationship has a quality worth continuing in the ordinary circumstances that the years have produced. Sir Robert knows of the continuing, and has not sought to engage with it in either direction. which is the honest account of Robert's relationship to the continuing, and which is the right relationship for Robert to have to it. The Eleanor dimension of this account being the most significant and the most lasting thing. The 9 years produced, rather than the discovering itself or the marriage's ending, is the specific and non-standard thing this story names in tonight's collection. The comfortable and pleasant form of the 9 years being set aside by the discovering's weight and the weight's setting aside, producing the condition for the most honest and the most present version of the relationship with Eleanor is a specific and important quality of this account. And the quality is the honest account of what the discovering's acute aftermath can produce into the relationships outside the discovering's immediate territory, when the weight's setting aside of the ordinary management coincides with the most significant relationship outside the territory, being the relationship whose ordinary management the removal makes most available to be set aside. The next story comes from a man who had been in a relationship for 7 years and who discovered his partner's infidelity in the most public and the most exposed form. Of the discovering that tonight's collection has contained, at a gathering of mutual friends, in a moment that was witnessed by people who were known to both of them, and who found that the public quality of the discovering produced specific and lasting consequences that the private discovering does not produce in the same form, because the public quality meant that the discovering's territory included not only the two people inside the relationship, but the specific and particular community of people who had witnessed the discovering's moment and who were now inside the discovering's territory from the outside in ways that the public quality had made unavoidable. Her name was Laura, and the 7 years had been the 7 years of a genuine and established relationship that had developed from the beginning into the specific and layered thing that 7 years of genuine investment produces. And the discovering arrived at a birthday dinner, not my birthday, and not Laura's birthday, but the birthday of a close mutual friend whose gathering had been the specific and ordinary occasion of a dinner with 12 people who had been inside our shared social world across most of the 7 years. I want to describe the birthday dinner's specific and relevant qualities before the discovering's moment, because the qualities are the ground of the public qualities' specific and lasting consequences. The 12 people at the birthday dinner were not peripheral acquaintances. They were the specific and particular people of our shared social world who had been the witnesses of the 7 years in the specific and ambient way that a close social world witnesses the relationships it contains. They had been at the other gatherings and the other occasions of the 7 years, and they knew the relationship in the specific and particular way that a close social world knows the relationships it has been the witness of across the years of the witnessing. The discovering's moment arrived through the specific and accidental route of a phone. Laura's phone, which had been on the table, in the ordinary way of the phones that are on the tables at the dinners where the people present have the phones on the tables, and which produced a notification whose content was visible to the person sitting adjacent to Laura, a person named Mark, who was one of the 12, and who had been one of the closest of the social world's people across the 7 years. In the specific and accidental way of the notification's visibility to the adjacent person, Mark saw the notification's content, and the notification's content was the complete and immediate picture in the way of the content. That is what it is from the first reading. And Mark's seeing of the complete and immediate picture produced in Mark the specific and concentrated quality of someone who has received significant information that they had not sought, and that they are now in the specific and complicated position of being in possession of in the context of the gathering of 12 people who include both the person the information is about and the person the information is most relevant to. Mark did not tell me at the dinner. He told me the following morning in the private and careful form of someone who has been in possession of the information overnight and who has determined that the telling is the honest response to the possession, and that the honest response requires the private form rather than the public form that the gathering might have made available. The telling was in the private and careful form, and was the honest and direct account of the notification's content. And I received it with the specific and total quality of the complete and immediate picture, arriving through a route that included Mark's overnight possession of the information alongside the notification's content, which is the specific and additional quality of the public discovering's route that the private discovering does not contain. The confrontation with Laura happened the morning of Mark's telling, and the confrontation produced the confirmation and the fuller account of the 7 months that the notification had been the partial visibility of. The confrontation and the confirmation and the fuller account were the standard territory of the discovering's immediate aftermath. And I will move through the standard territory quickly to arrive at the specific and non-standard thing this account is organized around, which is the public quality's specific and lasting consequences. The public quality's specific and lasting consequences began the day following the confrontation in the specific and particular way of the social world's response to a discovering that has been witnessed by the social world's people. Mark had not told anyone the content of the notification after telling me. The overnight possession had produced the careful and private form of the telling, and the telling had been to me alone. But the social world's response to the discovering did not require the notification's content to be the root of the response, because the social world's people had been the witnesses of the 7 years in the specific and ambient way, and their witnessing had produced the specific and alert attention to the changes into the relationship's public texture that the confrontation and the confirmation had begun to produce. The changes into the relationship's public texture were the specific and immediate production of the discovering's aftermath in the context of the social world that had been the witness of the 7 years. Laura and I were no longer at the gatherings in the specific and ordinary way of the couple that the social world had been the witness of, and the no longer in the ordinary way was the public and visible change, whose public and visible quality was the direct production of the public discovering's specific and lasting consequences. The social world had been the witness of the 7 years, and was now the witness of the 7 years ending. And the witnessing of the ending was the specific and additional territory of the public discovering that the private discovering does not produce. I want to describe the experience of being inside the social world's witnessing of the ending, because the inside account of it is the thing that most accounts of the public discovering do not include. The inside account is the experience of being in the ordinary social texture of the familiar gatherings and occasions, while the familiar gatherings and occasions are now the occasions of the social world's witnessing of the ending rather than the occasions of the social world's witnessing of the relationship's continuation. The gatherings and the occasions are the same gatherings and occasions in their external form, and are the different thing in the quality of the witnessing they are now providing, and the inside experience of the different thing in the same external form is the specific and demanding quality of the public discovering's aftermath that the private discovering's aftermath does not produce. The social world's people responded in the specific and various ways that a close social world's people respond to the ending of a relationship that has been the witness of their particular gathering's territory across 7 years, some with the genuine and careful support of the engaged and honest presence, some with the specific and uncomfortable quality of people who are in the difficult position of the mutual friend, whose mutuality has become the complicated territory of the ending's aftermath, some with the ambient and subtle shift of the social world's realignment around the ending's new structure, rather than the prior relationship's structure. All of these were the honest and various expressions of the social world's response to the public discovering's consequences, and all of them were the specific and additional territory of the public discovering's aftermath that the private discovering does not produce. The 7 years ended into the months following the confrontation, in the honest and right way of an honest and right ending. The ending has been the concluded and examined thing of the years since, and has been held honestly as the genuine and right thing it was. The social world has realigned in the specific and natural way of social worlds that realign around the endings of relationships they have been the witness of, and the realignment has been the honest and natural production of the public quality's specific and lasting consequences, rather than the dramatic or the painful version that the dramatic account of the public discovering would imply. Landmark has been the closest of the social world's people across the years since the discovering, which is the specific and perhaps unremarkable quality of a relationship that had the most direct contact with the discovering's moment, and that has continued across the years in the honest and genuine form of the friendship that the 7 years had been building. The overnight possession of the notification's content and the private and careful form of the telling had been the honest and genuine expression of the quality of the friendship that had been building across the 7 years, and the quality of the friendship that the telling had expressed has been the quality of the friendship across the years since. The public quality of this discovering being the specific and non-standard thing this story names in tonight's collection, and the social world's witnessing of the ending being the specific and additional territory of the public discovering's aftermath that the private discovering does not produce, is the honest account of what the public quality produced, and what the inside experience of the social world's witnessing is, from the position of the person who is inside the witnessing, while being the primary figure of what is being witnessed. The inside account of that position is the specific and important thing this account has been providing, and the providing has been in the honest form of the position's experience, rather than the dramatic form that the public quality's external account might have implied. And the next story comes from a woman who had been with her partner for 5 years, and who discovered the infidelity not through the evidence or the disclosure or the third-party telling, but through the specific and unusual root of her own body, through a medical appointment whose results produced the complete and immediate picture in the specific and extraordinary form of the physical evidence that the body carries when the body has been inside the consequences of a parallel, without the person whose body it is having known the parallel existed. His name was James, and the 5 years had been the genuine and developing thing of two people who were inside the serious and committed version of the relationship, not the casual version, not the uncertain version, but the specific and deliberately committed version of two people who had been building the life that the 5 years had been the building of, with the full and genuine intention of the building being the permanent version, rather than the provisional one. The 5 years had produced the specific and layered thing of the genuine commitments building, the shared home and the shared decisions and the shared future, that the shared present had been the construction of. And I had been inside the building with the full quality of someone who is inside the genuine and permanent version, rather than the provisional one. The medical appointment was routine in the specific and ordinary sense of the routine appointment that the annual calendar of the adult woman's health produces, without any specific occasion or specific concern, producing the scheduling. The appointment was the kind that most women have and that most women move through, without the appointment producing anything other than the ordinary and unremarkable confirmation of the ordinary and unremarkable health that the routine appointment is the annual checking of. This appointment produced something other than the ordinary and unremarkable confirmation, and the something other was the complete and immediate picture in the specific and extraordinary form of the physical evidence that I'm going to describe as honestly and as carefully as the describing requires. In the results of the routine appointment included the specific and particular result that the routine appointment can produce when the body has been inside the consequences of a parallel, without the person whose body it is having known the parallel existed. The result was not ambiguous, and was not the result that the ordinary and unremarkable confirmation of health produces. It was the result that is the specific and physical evidence of a contact that had occurred alongside the 5 years without my knowledge. And the result was the complete and immediate picture in the most physical and the most undeniable form of the complete and immediate picture that the discovering can take. I sat in the examining room with the result for a long time before I moved. The sitting was the specific and suspended quality of someone who is inside the most physical and the most undeniable form of the complete and immediate picture, and who is in the period between the receiving of the result and the processing of what the result means in the territory beyond the medical appointment's immediate context. The medical context was the immediate context and was the context that required the immediate and practical response that the medical professional was providing, and I was inside the immediate and practical response while also being inside the beginning of the processing of what the result meant in the territory beyond the medical context. The two simultaneous contexts produced the specific and demanding quality of the examining room's period, the practical and the personal being required simultaneously, in the same examining room, in the same period, with the same body. That was the evidence of both. I left the appointment with the practical response to the medical context and its necessary and immediate form, and with the processing of the personal context in its beginning and still forming stage. And I drove home in the specific and concentrated condition of someone who is inside the most physical and the most undeniable form of the complete and immediate picture, and who is moving through the ordinary landscape of the ordinary afternoon, with the picture's complete and immediate weight as the interior experience of the ordinary afternoon's exterior. The ordinary afternoon's exterior was the ordinary afternoon it was, and the interior was the complete and immediate picture's weight. And the two simultaneous conditions produced the most demanding drive of the 5 years. I did not confront James the evening of the appointment. I held the result and its complete and immediate picture through the evening in the specific and deliberate condition of someone who is determining the form the confrontation requires before the confrontation, rather than producing the confrontation from the immediate weight of the results arriving. The form the confrontation required was the form that the most physical and the most undeniable evidence produces, not the confrontation that is working toward the complete picture from the partial evidence, but the confrontation that is presenting the complete and undeniable picture to the person who has been the agent of the picture's production and who is receiving the picture in its most physical and its most undeniable form. The confrontation happened the following morning. I presented the result to James in the specific and quiet form of someone who has the complete and undeniable picture and who is presenting it with the quiet rather than the dramatic quality, because the complete and undeniable quality of the physical evidence makes the dramatic form unnecessary. The physical evidence is its own sufficient presentation without the dramatic form's addition, and the quiet was the honest form of the confrontation that the complete and undeniable quality made available. James received the result with the specific and immediate quality of someone who is receiving the complete and undeniable picture in its most physical and most undeniable form, and who has, into the receiving, no available response other than the confirmation and the account. The denial was not available. The physical evidence is the specific and particular form of the complete and immediate picture that the denial cannot address, without the denial being the obvious and visible denial of the undeniable, and James was not the person who would produce the obvious and visible denial of the undeniable. He confirmed the result's implication and provided the account of the parallel, whose physical consequence the result had been the evidence of. The parallel had been with a woman named Sarah and had been running for 11 months of the 5 years. 11 months alongside the 5 years in the specific and physical form, whose physical consequence the routine appointment had been the occasion for discovering. The 11 months were the complete picture in its most physical and most undeniable form, and the complete picture's most physical form had produced in me the specific and additional dimension of the discovering's weight that the non-physical forms of the discovering do not produce. The discovering in its physical form is the discovering that is present not only in the knowledge and the reorganization of the prior years, but in the body itself. The body's evidence being the specific and additional weight of the physical form's discovering, and the body's evidence being carried into the medical context practical response, alongside the personal context processing, and the two contexts requiring their respective responses simultaneously from the same person and the same body. I want to describe the experience of the two simultaneous contexts, respective responses as honestly as I can, because the inside account of the two simultaneous responses is the specific and important thing that the non-physical forms of the discovering do not produce, and that the physical form produces in the specific and extraordinary way of the most physical and the most undeniable evidence. The medical context's practical response was genuine and was necessary, and was the immediate and primary response in the days following the appointment, because the practical response to the medical context result was the most immediate and the most necessary thing, the result required of the body that was its evidence. The personal context's processing was the simultaneous and secondary response in the days following the appointment. Secondary in the temporal sense of being the response that the medical context's practical response had to proceed in the ordering of the immediate requirements, not secondary in the importance or the weight of its eventual processing. The personal context processing produced, in the weeks following the appointment, the most significant and the most demanding examination of the 5 years that the 5 years had contained. The examination of the 5 years and the 11 months, and the complete and undeniable picture in its most physical form together. And the examination was the specific and genuine work of someone who is holding the knowledge and the body's evidence simultaneously, and who is doing the examining from the position of both simultaneously, rather than from the position of only the knowledge. The examining from the position of the body's evidence alongside the knowledge is the specific and additional dimension of the physical forms examining that the non-physical forms examining does not require. And the additional dimension is the most demanding and the most intimate part of the physical forms examining, because it is the examining that is most personal and most present in the specific and immediate way of the body, rather than only in the specific and immediate way of the knowledge. And the relationship ended in the weeks following the confrontation in the honest and clear way of an honest and clear ending. The ending was the right ending and was produced by the examination's clear conclusion, rather than the immediate weight of the appointment's result. I had done the work of the examining before the ending, rather than the ending being the immediate and unexamined response to the appointment's result. And the examined ending was the honest form of the ending that the 5 years and the 11 months and the complete and undeniable picture in its most physical form deserved. The ending has been the right ending and has been the concluded and examined thing of the years since. The routine appointment has not been routine in the same way since the appointment that was not routine. The annual calendar of the adult woman's health continues to produce the annual scheduling and the annual appointment and the annual ordinary, an unremarkable confirmation of the ordinary, an unremarkable health. And the annual appointments, since the appointment that was not routine, have been inside the specific and particular relationship to the routine appointment that the not routine appointment produced. The relationship of someone who knows that the routine appointment can produce the not routine result in the specific and extraordinary form of the complete and undeniable picture, and who moves through the routine appointment's ordinary texture with the specific and ambient awareness of that knowledge. The awareness is not the anxiety and is not the dramatic version of the changed relationship to the routine appointment. It is the honest and ambient awareness of someone who has been inside the not routine appointment's specific and extraordinary form, and who moves through the routine appointment with the honest and ambient relationship to the possibility that the honest and ambient relationship is the most accurate description of the physical form of the discovering, being the specific and extraordinary thing this story names in tonight's collection, and the two simultaneous contexts of the medical and the personal requiring their respective responses from the same person and the same body simultaneously, is the honest account of what the physical form's discovering produces that the non-physical forms do not produce. The body's evidence being the specific and additional weight of the physical form's discovering and the examining from the position of the body's evidence alongside the knowledge, being the most demanding and the most intimate dimension of the physical form's examining is the specific and important thing this account has been naming. And the naming has been in that honest and careful form that the body's territory and the personal territory simultaneously deserve. The next story comes from a man who had been married for 16 years and who discovered his wife's infidelity through the specific and unusual route of his wife's journal, not through the deliberate reading of the journal, which is the route that the deliberate form of the discovering through private writing takes, but through the specific and accidental route of the journals being left open on the kitchen table in the ordinary morning of a weekday, and whose reading of the open page had been the accidental and immediate form of the complete pictures arriving in the specific and concentrated form of another person's private and honest accounting of their own experience. My wife's name is Catherine, and the 16 years had been the 16 years of a marriage that had built the comprehensive and layered thing that 16 years of genuine effort between two people who loved each other builds. And the discovering arrived on a Tuesday morning in the specific and accidental form of the open journal on the kitchen table. I want to describe the specific quality of discovering another person's infidelity through their private and honest accounting of it, rather than through the found evidence of the communication between the two people involved. Because the two forms of the finding are different in the specific and important way that the private and honest accounting of an experience is different from the communication about the experience to the person the experience is with. The private and honest accounting is the person talking to themselves. The specific and interior form of the experience is processing that the journal is the container for, and whose honesty is the honesty of someone who is writing for themselves rather than communicating to another person. The found communication, the messages and the emails and the conversations that the conventional discovered evidence takes the form of, is the person communicating to the other person of the parallel, and the honesty of the communication is the honesty of the communication's purposes, rather than the honesty of the private and interior accounting. The two forms of honesty are different, and the difference produces a different quality, and the discovering depending on which form is the root. The open journals page was the private and honest accounting rather than the communication, and the private and honest accounting's quality was the specific and extraordinary quality of the discovering that this account is organized around, and of the page described Catherine's experience of the parallel. Not the parallel's facts and not the parallel's communications, but Catherine's interior experience of the parallel, in the specific and honest form that the private and interior accounting of one's own experience takes when the accounting is for oneself, rather than for another person. The interior experience's honest form included the specific and particular dimensions of the parallel's meaning to Catherine, what the parallel had been producing in her, what the parallel had been the expression of in her interior, what the parallel had been alongside the 16 years, and what the 16 years had been alongside the parallel. From the inside of Catherine's experience of both, the reading of the interior experience's honest form is the categorically different, discovering from the reading of the communications form, because the interior experience's honest form is the person's own accounting of their own experience, rather than the person's communication of the experience to another person, and the own accounting of one's own experience has the specific and concentrated intimacy of the most private and the most honest form of another person's interior. I had been inside 16 years of a marriage with Catherine, and had never been inside the specific and concentrated intimacy of Catherine's private and honest accounting of her own experience of the parallel, alongside the 16 years. Enrique's, and the inside of that specific and concentrated intimacy was the most significant and the most disorienting quality of the discovering's form. I want to be honest about the reading. The open journal on the kitchen table produced the accidental visibility of the first lines of the open page, and the first lines produced the specific and immediate recognition that the open page was the private and honest accounting, rather than the ordinary journal entry of the ordinary morning's thoughts, and the recognition produced the specific and complicated condition of someone who is into the accidental visibility of something that requires the determination of whether the reading is the honest response to the accidental visibility, or whether the accidental visibility requires the closing of the journal and the not reading as the honest response. The determination took the time of a few seconds and produced the reading as the honest response to the accidental visibility, on the basis that the accidental visibility had produced enough of the complete picture in the first lines to make the closing and the not reading. The avoidance of the complete picture rather than the respectful response to the private territory of the journal. I read the open page. The open page's reading produced the complete and immediate picture in the specific and concentrated form of the private and honest accounting, and the complete and immediate picture included not only the parallel's existence and the parallel's duration, but the interior experience of the parallel alongside the 16 years in Catherine's own honest accounting of both. And the interior experience's honest accounting was the most comprehensive and the most intimate version of the complete picture that any form of the discovering had produced in tonight's collection's territory. The communication form of the discovered evidence gives you the facts of the parallel. The private and honest accounting gives you the interior experience of the parallel alongside the relationship. And the interior experience is more comprehensive and more intimate than the facts in the specific and important way that another person's most private and honest accounting of their own experience is always more comprehensive and more intimate than the communication that the experience produces. I closed the journal and left it on the kitchen table in the specific and deliberate form of the not disturbing, not hiding that I had read it, not leaving the evidence of the reading that would tell Catherine I had read it, but returning it to the position it had been in on the kitchen table, in the honest acknowledgement of the accidental visibilities, having produced the reading rather than the deliberate seeking. The returning to position was the honest response to the accidental form of the reading rather than the concealment of the reading. And the distinction is the specific and important thing I want to be clear about in the account of the morning. I raised the journal with Catherine that evening, not in the confrontation's form, in the specific and quiet form of someone who is raising the accidental visibility of the open page into the reading that the accidental visibility had produced, and who is raising it in the honest form of what the reading had contained rather than the confrontation form of the evidence presentation. The raising was organized around the honest account of the accidental reading and what the accidental reading had produced, rather than the assembled evidence of the conventional confrontation. And the honest account of the accidental reading's form was the specific and important quality of the raising that the other forms of the confrontation would not have had. Catherine received the raising with a quality I had not anticipated, which was the quality of the immediate and complete relief of someone who has been carrying the weight of the private and honest accounting, the journal's weight, the weight of the most honest and most private accounting of the parallel alongside the 16 years, and who finds in the raising of the accidental reading the specific and genuine relief of the carrying's putting down through a rote that the deliberate disclosure had not yet produced, and that the accidental reading had produced in its place. The relief was genuine and was immediate, and was accompanied by the specific and honest engagement of someone who had been in the most private and honest accounting of their own experience, and who is now in the conversation about the accounting's content with the person the accounting had been alongside throughout the journal's writing. The conversation that followed was the longest and the most honest and the most present exchange of the 16 years, and its length and its honesty and its presence were the direct production of the specific and unusual form of the discovering, the private and honest accounting having been the complete picture's form, rather than the communication having been the complete picture's form, which meant the conversation was organized around Catherine's own interior experience of the parallel alongside the 16 years, rather than around the facts of the parallel that the communication form would have been organized around. The interior experience's conversation is the more intimate and the more demanding conversation than the facts conversation. And the more intimate and the more demanding conversation was what the 16 years and the journal's private and honest accounting had produced as the occasion for. The parallel had been with a man named William and had been running for 14 months of the 16 years. The 14 months and the interior experience of the 14 months alongside the 16 years had both been in the journal's open page and had both been in the evening's conversation and had both been in the examination that the conversation initiated and that the months following the conversation produced. The examination was genuine and was the most comprehensive examination of the 16 years that the 16 years had contained, and the comprehensive quality was the direct production of the discovering's form. The private and honest accounting having been the complete picture, rather than the communication form, which had made the comprehensive interior examination the natural extension of the discovering, rather than the work the discovering had to produce through the therapy's separate and additional container. And the marriage continued. The 16 years and the 14 months and the evening's conversation and the comprehensive examination together produced the specific and honest understanding that the examination had produced the most genuine foundation for the continuation that the 16 years had contained, and the foundation was the ground for the continuation, rather than the ending. The continuation has been inside the most genuinely honest version of the 16 years that the 16 years have produced, and the genuinely honest version has been the direct and specific production of the discovering's form. The private and honest accounting having made the interior experience the territory of the discovering rather than only the facts, which had made the interior experience the territory of the examination and the continuation, rather than only the territory of the journal. The private and honest accounting being the specific and unusual form of the discovering in this account, and the interior experience's honest form being more comprehensive and more intimate than the communication form's discovering, is what this story names in tonight's collection. The journal's accidental visibility producing the most interior and the most honest version of the complete picture that any form of the discovering in tonight's collection has produced is the specific and extraordinary quality of this discovering's form, and the conversation and the examination and the continuation that the interior forms discovering produced being the most genuine versions of their respective things in the 16 years, is the honest account of what the discovering specific form made possible, and that the other forms of the discovering would not have made possible in the same way. The next story comes from a woman who had been in a relationship for 4 years, and who discovered her partner's infidelity, and who found that the most significant and the most unexpected consequence of the discovering was the specific and particular way it reorganized her relationship to her own work, the professional life that had been running alongside the 4 years, with its own particular investment and its own particular importance, and who found that the reorganization of the professional life's relationship to the discovering was the thing that the years since have produced the clearest and the most useful understanding of. His name was Daniel, and the 4 years had been the genuine and present version of a relationship that had been building with the specific and deliberate quality of two people who were genuinely invested in the building. My work during the 4 years had been the specific and important dimension of my life that had its own investment and its own significance alongside the relationship. Not the work that is the background of the life, but the work that is one of the primary things of the life. The work that is the expression of the specific and genuine professional investment that the adult life had been building alongside the personal one. The discovering arrived in the third year through the specific and direct route of Daniel telling me. The voluntary disclosure was organized around the genuine remorse of someone who had been inside a parallel for 6 months and who had arrived at the honest recognition that the parallel's continuation required the disclosure as the honest response rather than the continued managing of the parallel alongside the relationship. The disclosure was genuine and the account was complete, and the standard territory of the discovering's immediate aftermath was the standard territory it is. The grief and the anger and the reorganization of the 3 years around the 6 months in the total and immediate way of the complete pictures arriving. I want to move to the specific and non-standard thing this account is organized around, which began in the week following the disclosure in the specific and particular way of the discovering's weight arriving in the professional context, rather than only in the personal context. The professional context is the territory that most accounts of the discovering's aftermath do not include in the honest accounting, because the discovering's immediate and primary territory is the personal, the relationship, and the grief, and the anger, and the examining of what the relationship had been and what the examining requires. The professional context is the secondary territory, in the temporal sense of being the territory that the personal territory's immediacy has to precede. Auxiliary and the professional context is therefore the territory that most accounts of the discovering's aftermath do not spend the time on that the personal territory receives. My professional context and the week following the disclosure was the specific and particular context of work that required the full engagement of the professional investment, the work that had been the primary thing of the professional life, and that required the specific and present quality of the fully engaged professional to be done in the form it required. The work was present in the week following the disclosure in the form it had always been present in, and was now being approached from the position of someone whose interior was inside the discovering's immediate weight, while the professional context required the interior's full engagement in a different and demanding form simultaneously. The two simultaneous demands on the interior produced the specific and particular quality of the week following the disclosure that I want to describe honestly, because the honest description of the two simultaneous demands is the thing that most accounts of the discovering's aftermath do not include. The personal demand was the grief and the anger and the reorganization and the beginning of the examining. The specific and total demands of the discovering's immediate weight on the interior. The professional demand was the full engagement of the professional investment in the work that required the full engagement. The specific and present quality of the fully engaged professional that the work required. The two simultaneous demands produced in my interior. The specific and concentrated experience of the discovering's weight being present in the professional context, space, in a way that the professional context was not equipped to contain, and that the work's full engagement was not able to prevent from being present. The discovering's weight being present in the professional context space produced something specific in the work, a quality of the work in the week following the disclosure that was different from the quality of the work in the prior weeks, in the specific and observable way of the work reflecting the interior's condition, rather than the interior's usual quality. The work was not bad work. The professional investment was genuine and was not absent from the week's work. The work was the work of someone whose interior was inside the discovering's weight while producing the work. And the discovering's weight's presence in the work was visible in the work in the specific and observable way of the interior's condition being the condition of the person producing the work, rather than only the condition of the person outside the work's production. I examined this in the weeks following the disclosure with the specific and honest attention of someone who has noticed something about the relationship between the interior's condition and the work's quality that the prior years had not produced the occasion for noticing. The noticing was the specific and important thing the discovering's weight's presence in the professional context's space had produced, and the noticing had been produced by the discovering's weight being the most significant interior condition. The adult professional life had been inside while producing the work that the work required. The prior significant interior conditions had produced their versions of the interior's condition being present in the work's production, but none of them had been the specific and total weight of the discovering's condition, and the discovering's condition's totality had made the interior's presence in the work's production visible in the specific and concentrated way of the most significant interior condition, producing the clearest version of the phenomenon. The phenomenon that the noticing was about was the specific and important relationship between the interior's condition and the work's quality, the way that the interior's most significant conditions are present in the work rather than absent from it, and the way that the presence is both the vulnerability of the work in the interior's most difficult periods and the specific and potential resource of the work in those same periods if the presence is engaged with honestly rather than managed against. The discovering's weight's presence in the work had been the vulnerability in the week following the disclosure, the interior's most significant condition being present in the work and the work's full engagement, being the simultaneous demand from the professional context. But the examining of the phenomenon across the weeks following the disclosure had produced the understanding that the discovering's weight's presence in the work was also the specific and potential resource, the most honest and the most present version of the interior's condition being available to the work, rather than being managed away from it. The understanding had produced the specific and significant revision of the relationship to the work that the years since the discovering have been the development of the revision of the relationship to the work from the relationship that manages the interior's condition away from the workspace to the relationship that engages with the interior's condition's presence in the workspace as the honest and present resource that the interior's most genuine conditions are when they are engaged with honestly rather than managed against. The revision is the specific and lasting thing the discovering produced in the professional life that the professional life had not produced through the prior years of the professional investment, and the revision's production through the discovering's route rather than through the professional life's own development is the specific and non-standard quality of this account. Daniel and I ended the relationship in the months following the disclosure in the honest and right way of an honest and right ending. The ending has been the concluded and examined thing of the years since, and the professional life has been the ongoing and developing thing of the years since, and the revision of the relationship to the work that the discovering had produced has been the most significant and the most lasting professional development of the years since the discovering. The discovering's non-standard gift to the professional life is the specific and important thing this account has been organized around, and the gift is held honestly alongside the loss and the ending, rather than the gift replacing the loss or the loss diminishing the gift. The discovering's weight's presence in the professional context space being the specific and non-standard thing this story names in tonight's collection, and the revision of the relationship to the work being the most lasting gift the discovering produced in the professional life is the honest account of what the discovering's immediate and total weight can produce into the territories outside the personal, when the territories outside the personal are engaged with honestly rather than managed against during the discovering's immediate aftermath. The professional life being the territory of the discovering's most significant non-standard consequence in this account is the specific and honest thing this story has been providing, and the providing has been in the honest form of the inside account of the two simultaneous demands that the discovering and the professional context produced in the week following the disclosure. The next story comes from a man who had been with his partner for 8 years and who discovered the infidelity, not through any single route, but through the specific and unusual experience of his partner confessing to him in the middle of an argument about something entirely unrelated. An argument about the ordinary and domestic disagreement that long relationships produce, whose escalation had arrived at the specific and concentrated moment where the confession had arrived, not as the organized and deliberate disclosure, but as the uncontrolled and immediate production of an interior that had been carrying the parallel for 10 months, and that had found, in the argument's escalation, the specific and involuntary occasion for the putting down of the carrying. Her name was Nina, and we had been together for 8 years, and the argument was about the specific and ordinary domestic disagreement that 8 years of sharing a living space produces in the form of the accumulated and unremarkable friction of two people who know each other well enough to have the arguments about the things that long relationships have the arguments about. The argument had escalated in the specific and ordinary way of the long relationships argument that finds the escalation through the accumulated weight of the prior, unremarkable frictions rather than through the specific weight of the current disagreement's content alone. And the escalation had arrived at the specific and concentrated moment where the argument's emotional weight had produced in Nina the involuntary and immediate production of the thing that the 10 months of the carrying had been the weight of. She said it in the argument, not the organized and deliberate form of the disclosure, the involuntary and immediate form of something that has been carried for 10 months, and that finds the specific and concentrated moment of the argument's escalation as the involuntary occasion for the putting down that the carrying's weight had been requiring. The saying was in the middle of a sentence about the domestic disagreement, and arrived in the middle of that sentence in the specific and abrupt way of the involuntary production rather than the organized disclosure. And the arriving produced in me the immediate and complete reorganization of the argument and the 8 years, simultaneously in the specific and total way of the complete picture arriving in the most involuntary and the most concentrated form. The argument stopped. The specific and immediate quality of the argument stopping is the first and the most significant thing the involuntary confession produced. The argument had been the escalating thing of the long relationship's accumulated friction, and the confession had stopped it in the immediate and complete way of the most significant thing arriving in the middle of the less significant thing and producing the complete reorientation of the less significant thing around the most significant thing's arrival. The domestic disagreement was gone in the moment of the confession saying, and what replaced it was the complete and immediate silence of two people who are in the aftermath of the most significant thing's involuntary arrival in the least expected form. I want to describe the silence because the silence is the specific and important thing that the involuntary confession's form produced, that the organized disclosure does not produce in the same form. The organized disclosure arrives with the preparation. The organizer has prepared the disclosure, and the receiver is receiving something that has been prepared, which means the disclosure arrives with the organization's quality, even as the content is significant and difficult. The involuntary confession arrives without the preparation. Neither the confessor nor the receiver has been prepared for the confession's moment. And the unprepared quality produces the specific and extraordinary silence of two people who are in the complete and immediate reorganization simultaneously, and without the preparation that either of them would have used to approach the reorganization if the approaching had been deliberate. Nina was inside the silence with a specific and concentrated quality of someone who has produced the involuntary confession and who is in the immediate aftermath of the producing, the specific and extraordinary condition of someone who is in the first moments of the awareness that the 10 months of the caring has ended through the involuntary, rather than the deliberate rote, and whose awareness of the ending is simultaneous with the awareness of the confession's involuntary form and the confession's consequences. She was not in the relief of the organized disclosures putting down. She was into the specific and disorienting condition of someone who has put down the carrying through the involuntary route and who is into the first moments of the involuntary route's aftermath. Without the preparation, the deliberate route would have provided. I was inside the silence with the specific and concentrated quality of someone who has received the complete and immediate picture in the most involuntary and the most unexpected form, and who is in the first moments of the complete and immediate picture's weight, without the gradual approach of the accumulating evidence or the organized receipt of the deliberate disclosure. The complete and immediate picture had arrived in the middle of an argument about a domestic disagreement, and the middle of the argument arrival was the specific and extraordinary form of the arriving that the silence was the first response to. The silence lasted several minutes. Several minutes of the two of us in the specific and extraordinary condition of the argument stopping and the confession's involuntary arrival, and the complete and immediate picture's weight in the silence that the confession had produced in place of the argument that had been the context. The several minutes were the most significant minutes of the 8 years in the specific and concentrated way of the most significant thing arriving in the most involuntary and the most unexpected form. And the several minutes' silence was the honest and necessary first response to the most significant thing's arrival, before the conversation that the most significant thing required could begin. The conversation that began after the several minutes' silence was the longest and the most honest and the most present exchange of the 8 years. And the length and the honesty and the presence were the direct production of the involuntary confession's specific form. The involuntary form, having removed the preparation from both sides of the conversation simultaneously, which produced the most unmanaged and the most genuinely present version of the exchange that the 8 years could have produced. The organized disclosure produces the managed version of the conversation. The confessor has prepared, and the receiver has the gradual approach. And the management is not the dishonesty. It is the honest and reasonable response to the significant and difficult contents requirement of the management. The involuntary confession's conversation is the unmanaged version. Neither side has the management available in the form the preparation would have produced. And the unmanaged version is the more disorienting and the more difficult version, and is also the more genuinely present and the more honest version of the exchange, because the management's absence is the presence's specific condition. Nina's account of the 10 months into the unmanaged conversation was the most honest account of another person's interior experience, of a parallel that the 8 years had produced the capacity to receive. And the most honest account was the direct production of the involuntary confession's unmanaged form. She had not prepared the account, and had not organized the account, and had not managed the account in the direction of the most receivable version. She had given the account in the immediate and genuine form of someone who is in the first moments of the involuntary confession's aftermath, and whose account is therefore the most honest and the most immediate version of the interior experiences accounting that the 10 months had accumulated. The most honest and the most immediate version was more difficult to receive than the managed version, and was more genuinely present and more genuinely informative than the managed version, and the more genuinely present and more genuinely informative quality was the specific and important thing the involuntary confessions form had produced. The 10 months had been with a man named Oliver, and the 10 months' honest account included the specific and interior dimensions of what the 10 months had been, and what the 10 months had been the expression of in Nina's interior, alongside the 8 years. And the interior dimensions were the specific and honest account of a dimension of Nina's experience of the 8 years, that the 8 years had not previously produced the condition for the honest accounting of. the specific and long-standing dimension of her experience of intimacy, and the specific and particular forms that the intimacy required in the most genuine version, and that the 8 years had been producing in the specific and slightly different form rather than the most genuine version. The 10 months had been the expression of the most genuine form seeking in the specific and imperfect root that the seeking had found, and the seeking had been the interior dimension that the 8 years had not produced the condition for the honest accounting of before the involuntary confession's unmanaged conversation had produced it. I received the interior dimension's honest account with the specific and genuine quality of someone who is inside the unmanaged conversation's most present and most honest version, and who is therefore in the position to receive the most honest account that the most present and most honest version makes available. The receiving was the most significant receiving of the 8 years, and was the direct production of the involuntary confession's specific and unmanaged form. And the receiving produced in me the specific and genuine understanding of the 8 years, that the 8 years had not previously produced the condition for, the understanding of what the 8 years had been from Nina's interior experience of them, rather than from the shared and mutual account of the 8 years that the 8 years had produced in their ordinary texture. The relationship ended in the months following the involuntary confession's conversation. The ending was the honest and examined conclusion of the months of the most genuine engagement of the 8 years that the involuntary confession's conversation had initiated, and the ending was the right ending, and has been the right ending across the years since. The domestic disagreement that had been the argument's occasion has been the specific and particular memory of the 8 years that the years since have returned to most often. And the returning is not the returning of someone who is examining the domestic disagreement or the argument. It is the returning to the specific and ordinary occasion that the most significant and the most involuntary thing of the 8 years had arrived in the middle of, and the returning is the honest and ambient reflection on the specific and ordinary occasion's transformation through the involuntary confession's arrival into the most significant moment of the 8 years. The involuntary confession in the middle of the domestic argument being the specific and extraordinary form of this discovering, and the unmanaged conversation's most present and most honest version being the direct production of the involuntary form, is what this story names in tonight's collection. The preparation's absence from both sides of the confession's conversation, producing the most genuinely present and most genuinely honest version of the exchange, is the specific and important quality of the involuntary form's discovering, and the most genuine version being more difficult and more disorienting and more genuinely informative than the managed version, is the honest account of what the involuntary confession's specific form produces that the organized disclosure does not produce in the same way. The next story comes from a woman who had been married for 14 years and who discovered her husband's infidelity, and who found that the most significant and the most lasting dimension of the discovering's aftermath was the specific and unexpected relationship that developed between her and her own therapist across the months of the discovering's processing. A relationship that had been the professional and appropriate relationship of the client and the therapist for the 3 years before the discovering, and that became, in the months of the discovering's processing, the most significant and the most transformative professional relationship of the adult life, Bai's, and whose becoming the most significant and the most transformative professional relationship had been the direct production of the discovering's weight, producing the conditions for the most genuine engagement with the therapeutic relationship that the 3 prior years had not produced. My husband's name was Philip, and the 14 years had been the genuine and layered thing of a long marriage's building, and my therapist's name is Dr. Sarah Chen, and I have been into the therapeutic relationship with Dr. Chen for 7 years, across the discovering's processing and the years following it, and the therapeutic relationship is the specific and non-standard territory of this account, rather than the discovering itself, which arrived in the 9th year through the specific and ordinary route of the found evidence and whose standard territory I will describe briefly before arriving at the non-standard thing. The found evidence was in the 9th year and was the complete and immediate picture in the way of the unambiguous evidence, and the confrontation produced the confirmation and the complete account of the 18 months that the found evidence had been the partial picture of, and the 18 months had been with a woman named Helen, and had been running alongside the 14 years in the specific and serious form of an established parallel, rather than an uncertain or a beginning one. The standard territory of the discovering's immediate aftermath was the standard territory. The grief and the anger and the reorganization and the beginning of the examining. And the marriage ended in the months following the confrontation in the honest and right way of an honest and right ending. The ending was the right ending and has been the right ending across the years since, and is the concluded and examined thing. The non-standard territory began in the week following the confrontation in the specific and particular way of the therapeutic appointment that had been scheduled before the confrontation, and that the confrontation's week had made the most significant appointment of the 3 years of the therapeutic relationship. I arrived at Dr. Chen's office in the week following the confrontation in the specific and concentrated condition of the discovering's immediate weight as the primary interior experience, which was the most significant interior experience I had brought to the therapeutic relationship in the 3 years of the relationship's prior appointments. The prior 3 years' appointments had been the genuine and valuable engagements of the therapeutic relationship in the specific and ordinary form that the therapeutic relationship takes when the therapeutic relationship's client is bringing the genuine and valuable material of the adult life's ongoing navigation to the appointments without the most significant and the most acute interior experience being the primary material of the appointments. The prior 3 years had been the genuine and valuable version of the therapeutic relationship, and had not been the most significant and the most transformative version, which is the honest account of the prior 3 years' quality in relation to the version the discovering's weight would produce. Dr. Chen received the discovering's week in the specific and professional way of the skilled and present therapist. The specific and particular quality of the trained and genuine engagement with the most significant and the most acute material that the skill and the training and the genuine presence together produce. The receiving was the most skilled and the most present receiving I had experienced in the 3 years of the therapeutic relationship, and the most skilled and the most present receiving was the direct production of the discovering's weight, being the most significant material the therapeutic relationship had encountered in the 3 years. The most significant material producing the most skilled and the most present receiving, which is the specific and important relationship between the material significance and the therapeutic relationship's quality that the discovering's weight had made visible. The months following the confrontation were the months of the most significant and the most transformative engagement of the therapeutic relationship that the 7 years of the relationship have contained. Either way, and the most significant and the most transformative engagement was the direct production of the discovering's weight, being the primary material of the month's appointments. The weights being the primary material produced the conditions for the most genuine and the most present engagement with the therapeutic relationship that the 3 prior years had not produced. Not because the prior 3 years had been insufficient, but because the prior 3 years' material had not been the material that requires the most genuine and the most present engagement in the specific and concentrated form that the discovering's weight requires. I want to describe what the most genuine and the most present engagement with the therapeutic relationship produced across the months of the discovering's processing, because the describing is the specific and important thing this account is organized around. the most genuine, and the most present engagement produced the examination of the most significant and the most long-standing dimensions of my own interior that the 3 years of the prior therapeutic relationship had been circling without having reached, in the specific and deepest form that the dimensions required. The discovering's weight had been the condition that the most genuine and the most present engagement required to reach the dimensions in their specific and deepest form, because the discovering's weight had removed the ordinary management of the interior's most significant dimensions that the prior 3 years' material had not required to be removed. The dimensions that the most genuine and the most present engagement reached in their specific and deepest form were the specific and long-standing dimensions of my experience of intimacy and trust in the closest relationships, the particular and individual patterns of the way I had been inside the closest relationships of the adult life, including the 14 years of the marriage, and whose honest examination had been the most significant and the most necessary work of the adult interior, without having had the specific condition that required the most genuine and the most present engagement with them, until the discovering's weight had produced that condition. The examining of the dimensions in their specific and deepest form was the most significant and the most transformative work of the therapeutic relationship, and was the direct production of the discovering's weight's condition, having removed the ordinary management that the prior 3 years had not required to be removed. Dr. Chen's role in the most significant and the most transformative work is a specific and important thing I want to describe honestly, because the role is the thing this account is organized around, rather than the discovering standard territory. Dr. Chen's role was the most skilled and the most genuine engagement with the most significant material that the 7 years of the therapeutic relationship have contained, and the engagement produced the most significant and the most present therapeutic relationship that the 7 years have produced, and the most significant and the most present therapeutic relationship was the direct production of the discovering's weight, having produced the conditions that the most genuine engagement required. Dr. Aiden Chen brought the skill and the training and the genuine presence to the material that the discovering's weight had produced as the most significant material, and the bringing was the most skilled and the most genuine form of the therapeutic relationship's professional engagement that the 7 years have contained. The 7 years of the therapeutic relationship since the discovering have been the years of the ongoing and developing engagement with the most significant and the most transformative work that the discovering's weight had initiated, and the ongoing and developing engagement has been the most significant and the most lasting professional relationship of the adult life. The discovering's weight having produced the conditions for the most genuine engagement with the therapeutic relationship is the specific and non-standard gift of the discovering's aftermath that this account has been organized around, and the gift is held alongside the loss and the ending of the marriage, rather than the gift replacing the loss or the loss diminishing the gift. Both are the honest account of the discovering's aftermath, and both are held simultaneously in the honest accounting of the 9 years and the 18 months and the months of the most genuine engagement and the 7 years of the ongoing therapeutic relationship that all of it has produced. The discovering's weight producing the conditions for the most genuine engagement with the therapeutic relationship, being the specific and non-standard thing this story names in tonight's collection, and the most significant and the most transformative professional relationship, being the direct production of the discovering's weight, having removed the ordinary management the prior years had not required to be removed, is the honest account of what the discovering's most acute weight can produce in the professional relationships of the discovering's immediate territory, when the most acute weight coincides with the most skilled and the most genuine engagement's availability in the professional relationships forms. The therapeutic relationship being the specific and important professional relationship of this account is the specific and honest thing this story has been naming, and the naming has been in the honest form of the inside account of the most significant and the most transformative work that the Discovering's Wait initiated, and that the 7 years of the ongoing therapeutic relationship have been the continuation of. No, the next story comes from a man who had been in a relationship for 2 years and who discovered his partner's infidelity, and the specific and unusual form of discovering it from the person his partner had been with, who contacted him directly and who provided the complete account of the parallel with the specific and organized quality of someone who had been inside the parallel and who had arrived at the decision that the honest response to the parallel's existence was the direct contact with the person the parallel had been alongside, rather than the organized and deliberate disclosure through the partner's route. Her name was Rebecca, and the person who contacted me was named Thomas, and the 2 years had been the genuine and present version of a relationship that had been building with the specific and deliberate quality of genuine investment. I want to describe the Thomas contact, because the Thomas contact is the specific and unusual form of the Discovering's route that this account is organized around, and the description of the contact requires the honest precision of the contact's specific quality, rather than the simplified version that the simplified account would produce. When Thomas contacted me through the specific and direct route of the professional social media platform that the adult professional life maintains in the ordinary way of the professional network's maintenance, the platform that is the professional network's public face, and that is the route through which professional contacts are made without the platform's use being the exclusive territory of the professional contact. Thomas had found my profile through Rebecca's profile on the same platform, which was a specific and ordinary route that the platform's social network structure makes available. And the contact had been the direct message that the platform's messaging function makes available to the people connected through the social network structure. The message Thomas sent was the most organized and the most deliberate personal communication I have received in the adult life, which is the specific and immediate quality of the message that I want to describe honestly, because the organized and deliberate quality is the thing that distinguishes the Thomas contact from the other third-party disclosures in tonight's collection. The message was not the casual or the accidental disclosure of someone who has let something slip in the ordinary course of the social world's communication. It was the organized and deliberate communication of someone who had determined that the direct contact was the honest response to the situation, and who had written the message with the specific and careful quality of someone who has been composing the message across a significant period of time before the sending. The message described the parallel between Thomas and Rebecca with the specific and complete honesty of the private and organized accounting, the duration of the parallel, the specific and relevant facts of the parallel's content, and the specific and honest account of Thomas's interior experience of the parallel and of the decision to contact me directly rather than through Rebecca's disclosure route. And the interior experience's account was the specific and unusual quality of the Thomas contact that the other third-party disclosures in tonight's collection had not contained. Thomas had not only provided the parallel's facts, but had provided the honest accounting of his own interior experience of the parallel and of the decision, which was the specific and personal dimension of the Thomas contact that the other third-party disclosures had not provided. I read the message in the specific and suspended condition of the complete and immediate pictures arriving through the most unexpected and the most organized form of the Discovering's route that the 2 years had not prepared for. The organized and deliberate quality of the message's form was the most significant quality of the arriving, because the organized and deliberate quality told me the Thomas contact was the product of the specific and serious decision-making of someone who had been inside the parallel and who had arrived at the direct contact as the honest response to the decision-making rather than the impulsive or the casual route of the third-party disclosure. The organized and deliberate quality was the evidence of the seriousness of the decision and the seriousness of the decision was the specific and important thing about the Thomas contact that the other forms of the third-party disclosure do not contain in the same concentrated form. I replied to Thomas's message with the specific and genuine quality of someone who has received the most organized and the most deliberate personal communication of the adult life, and who is responding with the honest engagement the communication's organization and deliberateness deserved. The reply was the acknowledgement of the message's receipt and the honest account of the complete and immediate picture's reorganization of the 2 years that the message had produced, and the reply was organized around the genuine questions that the message had produced, rather than the confrontation that the message's content might have been organized around. The genuine questions were about the specific and interior dimensions of Thomas's experience and Thomas's decision. The specific and honest dimensions of the message that the genuine questions were the honest response to, rather than the confrontational response that the message's content could have produced. Thomas replied, and the exchange that the two messages had initiated produced the most significant and the most extended honest exchange with a person whose relationship to me had been the specific and extraordinary relationship of the person who had been inside the parallel with my partner and who had contacted me directly as the honest response to the parallel's existence. The exchange was 3 messages in total and was the most significant and the most honest 3-message exchange of the adult life. And the significance was the direct production of the Thomas contact's organized and deliberate quality, and the genuine question's honest engagement with the interior dimensions of the experience. The confrontation with Rebecca happened in the same week as the Thomas contact and exchange, and Rebecca's receipt of the confrontation had the specific and immediate quality of someone who is receiving the confrontation that has arrived through the most unexpected and the most organized form of the third-party disclosure, which is the form whose unexpectedness produces the most concentrated and the most immediate quality of the complete and undeniable pictures arriving. Rebecca confirmed the parallel and confirmed Thomas's account of the parallel and provided the fuller account of the 9 months that the Thomas contact had been the organized disclosure of, and the 9 months account was the honest and complete version that the Thomas contact's organized and deliberate quality had made the most honest and the most complete available version. The relationship ended in the weeks following the confrontation, in the honest and clear way of an honest and clear ending. The ending was the right ending, and the Thomas contact had been the most organized and the most deliberate route of the discoverings arriving, that the 2 years had produced the most organized and the most deliberate response to, which was the honest and clear ending, rather than the extended examination of the continuation's possibility, that the less organized and the less deliberate forms of the discovering's route had produced in some of the prior stories in tonight's collection. Thomas, I have not been in contact with since the 3-message exchange of the discovering's week, which is the specific and honest accounting of the contact's conclusion that the 3-message exchange had been the organized and deliberate and complete form of. Thomas had organized the contact around the disclosure and the honest account of the interior experience and the decision, and the 3-message exchange had been the honest and complete engagement with the organized and deliberate contact's form and content, and the conclusion of the 3-message exchange had been the honest conclusion of the contact's organized and deliberate purpose, rather than the beginning of an ongoing relationship. The conclusion was the right conclusion and has been the right conclusion across the years since the discovering's week. The Thomas contact being the specific and unusual form of this discovering, and the organized and deliberate quality of the direct contact from the person inside the parallel being the most concentrated and the most serious form of the third-party disclosure, is what this story names in tonight's collection. The interior experience's account being the specific and unusual dimension of the Thomas contact that the other third-party disclosures had not contained is the specific and important quality of this discovering's route, and the honest engagement with the interior dimensions of the organized and deliberate contacts form. Being the most significant exchange of the adult life is the honest account of what the most organized and the most deliberate form of the third-party disclosures route produces, when the honest engagement with the interior dimensions is the response rather than the confrontational response that the content could have produced. The next story comes from a woman who had been with her partner for 10 years, 7 of them married, and who discovered the infidelity in the specific and unusual form of discovering it through her child, not through the child's deliberate telling. The child was 6 years old, and the 6-year-old's account was not the deliberate telling of someone who understood the significance of what they were relaying, but through the specific and accidental form of the child repeating something they had heard, in the innocent and unremarkable way of a 6-year-old who has heard something and who repeats the heard thing in the ordinary course of the 6-year-old's communication with the parent, without the repeating being organized around any understanding of the heard thing's significance. My husband's name is David, and our daughter's name is Lily. And the 10 years had been the genuine and layered thing of a long relationship that had produced the specific and comprehensive shared life of the married years, the home and the child, and the particular and irreplaceable texture of 2 people who had been building the permanent version of the shared life, with the specific and genuine intention of the permanent version being what they were building. I want to say something about Lily before I describe the discovering, because Lily is the ground of the discovering specific form, and the ground requires the honest description of the 6-year-old who was the discovering's root, without the 6-year-old knowing she was the discovering's root. Lily at 6 was the specific and particular child that she was, curious and articulate in the specific way of the 6-year-old who has been inside the languages learning long enough to have developed the specific and individual voice that the particular child develops, and who uses the voice and the constant and unremarkable communication of the 6-year-old's experience of the world. The constant and unremarkable communication was the specific and ordinary texture of the evenings and the mornings of the household's daily life, and the texture had been the genuine and valued quality of the years that Lily had been in the household's daily life. The communication was the 6-year-old's honest and complete sharing of the day's experience with the parent who was most available to receive the sharing in the specific moment of the sharing's production. I was the parent who was most available to receive the sharing on the Thursday evening, when the sharing produced the specific and accidental form of the discovering's root. David was in the other room, and Lily was at the kitchen table with the homework that the first grade produces, and I was at the counter preparing the dinner, and the specific and ordinary texture of the Thursday evening's routine. And Lily was talking in the continuous and unremarkable way of the 6-year-old who talks while doing the homework, in the ambient and companionable presence of the parent who is doing the dinner preparation. The talking produced the specific and accidental form of the discovering when Lily said something, whose content included a name I had not heard before in the specific and contextual form that the name arrived in, which was the context of somewhere that David had apparently been with Lily on a recent Saturday while I had been elsewhere. The name was a woman's name, and the context was the specific and innocent description of the Saturday's activity in the 6-year-old's honest and unremarkable account of a Saturday that had been a good Saturday in the 6-year-old's experience of it. And Lily was describing the Saturday's good quality, and the name appeared in the description in the innocent and unremarkable form of the 6-year-old who includes all the relevant and irrelevant details of the experience in the description, without the organizing principle of the adult who selects the details on the basis of their relevance to the listener's experience. I received the name in the Thursday evening's ordinary texture with the specific and immediate quality of the complete and immediate picture's beginning, not the complete picture, but the beginning of the picture, in the form of the name's appearance in the innocent and unremarkable description of the Saturday. and the beginning produced the specific and alert attention of someone who has received a piece of information in the ordinary texture's context, that the ordinary texture's context was not the intended delivery mechanism of. The alert attention was the honest and immediate response to the information's arriving in the form it had arrived in, and the alert attention produced the gentle and careful questions that the 6-year-old's innocent and unremarkable description invited without the gentle and careful questions being the interrogation of the 6-year-old, or the production of the anxiety in the 6-year-old that the interrogation would have produced. The gentle and careful questions produced the fuller picture and the specific and innocent form of the 6-year-old's fuller description of the Saturday's activity, and the fuller description included the specific and relevant details that the fuller picture required in the innocent and unremarkable form of the 6-year-old who was providing the fuller description in response to the parents' genuine and interested reception of the sharing. The fuller description was the complete picture in the innocent and unremarkable form of the 6-year-old's honest account of the Saturday, and the complete picture in the innocent and unremarkable form was the most disorienting quality of this specific form of the discovering. The complete picture arriving in the innocent and unremarkable form of the 6-year-old's Thursday evening homework description, rather than in the direct and confrontational form of the organized disclosure or the found evidence. I continued the Thursday evening in the specific and deliberate condition of someone who is inside the complete pictures, arriving in the most ordinary and the most innocent of all possible forms, and who is managing the interior's response to the complete pictures, arriving in the context of the 6-year-old at the kitchen table and the dinner preparation at the counter, and the Thursday evening's ordinary texture as the immediate environment. The managing was the most demanding managing of the 10 years, because the managing required the ordinary texture's continuation in the presence of the 6-year-old, who was the innocent and unwitting root of the complete pictures arriving, and who needed the ordinary texture's continuation more than any other person in the Thursday evening's immediate environment. And David came into the kitchen during the dinner preparation, and I was in the specific and concentrated condition of managing the interior's response to the complete picture, while being in the ordinary and companionable texture of the Thursday evening's dinner preparation with the 6-year-old at the table, and the specific and concentrated condition was the most demanding condition of the 10 years in the specific and immediate sense of requiring the managing in the context where the managing was most necessary and most immediately present in its necessity. I managed the Thursday evening through the dinner and the Lily's bedtime and the specific and ordinary routines that the Thursday evening's household texture produces until Lily was asleep, and the managing's context had changed from the 6-year-old's presence to the adult conversation that the managing's context change made available. I raised the name with David after Lily was asleep in the specific and quiet form of someone who is raising the complete picture that the 6-year-old's innocent and unremarkable description had been the root of, and whose raising is organized around the complete picture's root as the specific and extraordinary quality of the raising, rather than the confrontational form of the assembled evidence's presentation. Though the quiet form was the honest form available, and was the form that the 10 years of the marriage and the Lily dimension of the household and the managing of the Thursday evening's ordinary texture had produced as the most honest and the most present form of the raising. David received the raising with the specific and immediate quality of someone who is receiving the confrontation that has arrived through the most unexpected and the most innocent of all possible routes, the 6-year-old's Thursday evening homework description, and who is into the specific and concentrated condition of the complete and undeniable pictures arriving through the root, whose innocence made the denial the most obviously unavailable response. He confirmed the complete picture and provided the account of the 8 months that the 6-year-old's fuller description had been the innocent and partial picture of, and the 8 months account was the full and complete version that the quiet form of the raising had produced the honest and complete response to. The woman's name was Catherine, and the 8 months had been running alongside the 10 years in the specific and established form of a parallel that had been inside the household's daily life, in the specific and extraordinary dimension of having been the context of at least one Saturday's activity, with Lily present, which was the specific and most serious quality of the 8 months that the 6-year-old's innocent description had made visible in the complete pictures arriving. The Saturday's context was the most serious quality, because the Saturday's context had been the Saturday in which the parallel had been the context of Lily's experience of the Saturday without Lily knowing. It was the parallel's context, and the parallels having been the context of Lily's Saturday without Lily's knowing was the most serious dimension of the 8 months in the honest accounting of the 8 months complete picture. I want to be honest about the specific and additional weight that the Lily dimension of the discovering produced in the discovering's immediate aftermath. Because the Lily dimension is the specific and extraordinary quality of this account that the other accounts in tonight's collection have not contained. The Lily dimension produced the specific and additional weight of the parent, whose child has been inside the parallels context without the child's knowing, and the parent's weight is the specific and additional dimension of the discovering that the non-parent versions of the discovering do not contain. The grief and the anger and the reorganization of the 10 years were the standard territory of the discovering's immediate aftermath, and the Lily dimension was the specific and additional weight alongside the standard territory, the weight of the parent who is holding the child's innocent and unwitting role in the discovering's root, and the child's innocent and unwitting presence in the parallels context simultaneously with the standard territory's weight. The marriage has continued. The 10 years and the 8 months and the Thursday evening and the examination that the Thursday evening had initiated together produced the specific and honest understanding that the examination had produced the most genuine foundation for the continuation that the 10 years had contained, and the foundation was the ground for the continuation rather than the ending. The continuation has required the most demanding and the most genuine engagement of the 10 years, and has been inside the most genuinely present version of the 10 years that the 10 years have produced, and the Lily dimension has been the specific and important part of the continuation's territory. The honest accounting of the Saturday's context and what the Saturday's context required in terms of the marriage's continuation's conditions has been the most serious and the most demanding dimension of the continuation's examination. Lily does not know, she is 9 now, and the Thursday evening's homework description has been the innocent and unremarkable. Thursday evening in her memory of the 3rd year of the household's daily life, and the innocent and unremarkable quality of the Thursday evening in Lily's memory is held alongside the specific and extraordinary quality of the Thursday evening in the honest accounting of the 10 years, with the honest and careful awareness of the 2 different qualities of the same Thursday evening and the 2 different accountings. The 2 different qualities of the same Thursday evening are both held honestly, and the holding of both is the specific and ongoing work of the honest accounting of the 10 years that the Thursday evening produced, the 6-year-old's innocent and unremarkable description being the specific and extraordinary root of this discovering, and the Lily dimension producing the specific and additional weight of the parent's discovering alongside the standard territory's weight, is what this story names in tonight's collection. The managing of the Thursday evening's ordinary texture in the 6-year-old's presence, being the most demanding managing of the 10 years, is the specific and important quality of this discovering's form, and the innocent and unwitting root being the most disorienting form of the complete pictures arriving, is the honest account of what the 6-year-old's innocent description produces in the parent who receives it as the discovering's most unexpected and most ordinary form, And the next story comes from a man who had been married for 18 years and who discovered his wife's infidelity in the specific and unusual form of a letter, a physical, handwritten letter addressed to his wife from the person his wife had been with, which had arrived in the ordinary mail of the household's ordinary morning, and which had been opened by him in the specific and accidental form of the household's mail. Opening routine producing the opening of a letter that had been addressed to his wife, and that he had not examined the addressee of before the opening. My wife's name is Margaret, and the 18 years had been the 18 years of the genuine and comprehensive marriage. That 18 years of genuine effort between two people who love each other builds, and the letter arrived on a Wednesday morning in the specific and ordinary form of the household's mail delivery. I want to describe the letter's arrival with the honest precision of the Wednesday morning's ordinary texture, because the ordinary texture is the specific and important ground of the letter's extraordinary content, arriving in the most ordinary of the morning's forms. The Wednesday morning was the ordinary Wednesday morning of the household's daily routine. The coffee and the mail, and the specific and unremarkable activities of the household's morning before the day's professional demands, produced the departure from the household's morning into the day's professional territory. I collected the mail in the ordinary way of the morning's mail collection and brought it to the kitchen table in the ordinary way of the morning's mail review. I was opening the morning's mail in the ordinary way of the household's mail opening routine when I opened the envelope that had been addressed to Margaret rather than to me. Making the opening was the accidental form of the ordinary mail opening routine, rather than the deliberate opening of a letter known to be addressed to another person. I had been opening the mail in the ordinary and unremarkable way of the household's routine, and the envelope's addressee had not been examined before the opening in the specific and ordinary way of the household's routine, not requiring the examination of each envelope's addressee before the opening in the ordinary flow of the morning's mail review. The opening was the accidental production of the ordinary routine, rather than the deliberate act of someone who had determined that the opening of another person's letter was the honest response to a specific occasion or a specific suspicion, and the letter's content was the complete and immediate picture in the most personal and the most private form that the letter's form makes available. The handwritten letter from a person named Edward to Margaret, whose content was the specific and personal account of a man who had been in a significant relationship with Margaret, and whose writing was the honest and personal expression of someone for whom the relationship had been the most significant thing of the recent period of his life. The letter was not the communication about the parallel in the form of the communication between two people who are inside the parallel. It was the personal expression of someone who had been inside the parallel, and whose personal expression was organized around the experience of the parallel from the inside of Edward's experience rather than the facts of the parallel's conduct. The inside of Edward's experience, expressed in the personal and handwritten form of the letter, was the most intimate and the most disorienting form of the complete picture that the discovering can take. More intimate and more disorienting than the found communication between the two people inside the parallel, because the found communication between the two people inside the parallel is the communication organized around the parallel's shared territory, and the personal expression in the handwritten letter is the individual's most private and most honest account of the parallel's meaning to the individual. The individual's most private and most honest account of the parallel's meaning was the specific and extraordinary quality of the letter's form that the Wednesday morning's ordinary mail opening routine had produced as the discovering's root. I sat at the kitchen table with the open letter for a long time before I moved. The sitting was the specific and suspended quality of someone who is inside the most private and the most personal form of the complete and immediate pictures arriving, and who is in the period between the complete pictures arriving and the beginning of the processing that the complete picture requires. The letter was in my hands, and the Wednesday morning's ordinary texture was in the kitchen around me. And the 18 years were in the process of the complete and immediate reorganization around the letter's content, and the three simultaneous conditions: the letter in my hands, the ordinary texture around me, the reorganization in process, were the specific and extraordinary quality of the Wednesday morning's kitchen table period. Margaret came into the kitchen while I was still at the table with the letter, which is the specific and accidental quality of the Wednesday morning's timing that the organized confrontation's timing would not have produced. The accidental quality of the timing, Margaret's entering the kitchen before I had finished the sittings period and before I had determined the form the confrontation would take, produced the confrontation in its most immediate and its most unmanaged form, the form that the organized confrontation's preparation would have revised into the more managed version. The confrontation was the immediate and unmanaged form of the letter in my hands, and Margaret in the doorway, and the 18 years in the process of the complete and immediate reorganization. And the immediate and unmanaged form was the most present and the most honest form available in the Wednesday morning's specific and accidental timing. Margaret's receipt of the immediate and unmanaged confrontation produced the honest and complete account of the 20 months that the letter's content had been Edward's private and personal expression of. 20 months of the parallel alongside the 18 years, and the honest and complete account of the 20 months was the most significant and the most honest exchange of the 18 years, in the specific and concentrated quality of the most private and the most personal form of the complete picture having been the route through which the confrontation's occasion had arrived. The private and personal form of Edward's letter having been the complete picture's route, produced in the confrontation's exchange, the specific and intimate quality of someone who is engaging with the most private and the most personal dimensions of the parallels territory, rather than only the factual dimensions. Because Edward's letter had made the most private and the most personal dimensions the territory of the discovering rather than only the factual dimensions. The 18 years had been the genuine and comprehensive marriage that they had been, and the 20 months had been the genuine and established parallel that the letter's private and personal expression had been the account of, and the Wednesday morning's kitchen table had been the specific and ordinary occasion of the complete and immediate picture's most private and most personal form, arriving into the most ordinary of all possible forms. The 18 years ended in the months following the Wednesday morning, in the honest and right way of a genuine and honest ending, and the ending has been the right ending, and the concluded and examined thing of the years since. Edward's letter I have held in the specific and honest way of the most private and the most personal form of the complete picture that the discovering can take, not as the dramatic artifact of the extraordinary occasion, but as the honest and personal expression of a person whose most private accounting of his own experience had been the Wednesday morning's mail delivery, and whose private accounting had been the most intimate and the most disorienting form of the complete pictures arriving in the ordinary texture of the household's Wednesday morning routine. The letter is the specific and honest account of what the discovering's most private and most personal form produces in the person who receives it through the most ordinary of the ordinary morning's roots, and the honest accounting of that producing is the specific and important thing this account has been providing, in the handwritten letter being the specific and private and personal form of this discovering's root, and the most private and the most personal form being the most intimate and the most disorienting form of the complete pictures arriving, is what this story names in tonight's collection. The ordinary mail opening routine being the accidental root of the most intimate and the most disorienting form is the specific and extraordinary quality of the Wednesday morning's kitchen table period. And the kitchen table period being the most significant period of the 18 years and the specific and concentrated way of the most private and most personal form, producing the most present and the most intimate version of the complete pictures arriving, is the honest account of what the letter's form produces, that the other forms of the discovering's evidence do not produce in the same private and personal way. The next story comes from a woman who had been in a relationship for 3 years and who discovered her partner's infidelity through the specific and unusual route of social media, not the conventional form of the social media discovering, which is the finding of evidence on the partner's accounts, but the specific and reverse form of a stranger's account, producing the complete picture through the stranger's own social media documentation of the parallel's existence, which had been posted without the stranger's knowledge, that the person the parallel had been alongside had a partner whose social media presence made the documentation's visibility to the partner possible through the specific and ordinary route of the social media platform's suggested connections function. His name was Marcus, and the 3 years had been the genuine and present version of a relationship that had been building with the specific and deliberate quality of two people who were genuinely invested in the building. And the discovering arrived in the 2nd year through the specific and reversed form of the social media route that I want to describe with the honest precision of the route's specific and unusual quality. The social media platform had produced the suggested connection in the ordinary and algorithmic way of the platforms that suggest connections based on the social network structure and the mutual connections that the social network structure contains. The suggested connection was an account belonging to a woman named Sophia, and the suggestion had been produced by the specific and ordinary mechanism of the mutual connections that Marcus and I shared in the social network structure, making Sophia's account visible to my account as a suggested connection. I did not know Sophia and had no specific reason to examine Sophia's account beyond the ambient and ordinary way that the suggested connection's presence in the platform's interface produces the ambient and ordinary examination of the suggested account. The ambient and ordinary examination of Sophia's account produced the complete and immediate picture in the specific and reversed form of the social media route. Sophia's account contained the documentation of the parallel's existence in the specific and ordinary form of the personal social media account that documents the significant and the ordinary experiences of the life in the platform's public or semi-public form. The documentation was not the deliberate and organized communication between Marcus and Sophia about the parallel. It was Sophia's own social media documentation of her own life's significant and ordinary experiences, which included the parallel with Marcus in the specific and innocent way of someone who is documenting the significant relationship of her life without knowing that the person the relationship is alongside has a partner whose social media presence makes the documentation's visibility to the partner possible through the suggested connection mechanism. The documentation included photographs and the specific and personal expressions of someone who is inside a significant relationship and who is documenting the significant relationship in the ordinary social media way of the personal account's documentation of the life's significant things. The photographs and the personal expressions were the complete and immediate picture and the most public and the most ordinary form of the social media documentation, not the private and personal form of the handwritten letter or the private conversation, but the semi-public and ordinary form of the personal social media account's documentation of the life's significant relationships. The complete and immediate picture in the semi-public and ordinary form was the most disorienting quality of this specific form of the discovering. The complete picture arriving through the suggested connection's ambient and ordinary examination, rather than through the deliberate seeking or the accidental finding of the private evidence. The discovering through the public documentation is the discovering in the most ambient and the most ordinary of all possible forms. The platform's algorithmic suggestion having been the root of the complete pictures arriving through the most ordinary of the ordinary morning's online activities. I sat with the complete picture for 2 days before the confrontation. The 2 days were the specific and necessary period of the most significant and the most demanding interior work that the 2 years had produced. and the work was organized around the specific and unusual quality of the complete picture's root, the semi-public documentation of the parallel on Sophia's personal account, having been the complete picture's most public and most ordinary form. The public and ordinary form produce the specific and additional dimension of the discovering's weight that the private forms do not produce. The complete picture having been the semi-public documentation of the parallel's existence that had been available in the platform's semi-public space, which is the specific and additional weight of the public forms, discovering that the private form's discovering does not contain. The confrontation happened on the third day in the specific and quiet form of someone who is presenting the complete picture in its semi-public and ordinary form to the person who had been the parallel's participant, without knowing that the parallel's documentation had been the semi-public and ordinary form that the suggested connection had made visible. A.K. Marcus received the confrontation with the specific and immediate quality of someone who is receiving the complete picture in its most unexpected and most ordinary form, the semi-public documentation having been the complete picture's root rather than the private evidence or the organized disclosure, and the unexpected and ordinary quality of the root's form produced in Marcus, the specific and concentrated condition of someone who had not anticipated the discovering's root and who is in the complete pictures arriving in the form that the root's unexpected and ordinary quality had produced. He confirmed the complete picture and provided the account of the 7 months that the semi-public documentation had been the complete picture of, and the 7 months account was the honest and complete version that the confrontation's quiet form had produced the honest and complete response to. Sophia had not known about me. The semi-public documentation had been the innocent and ordinary documentation of someone who had been inside the significant relationship of the 7 months without knowing the significant relationship, had been alongside a 3-year relationship with a partner whose social media presence made the documentation's visibility possible through the suggested connection mechanism. The innocent and ordinary quality of Sophia's documentation was the specific and important dimension of the discovering's root that the confrontation's examination produced as the honest accounting of the root's specific and unusual quality. The relationship ended in the weeks following the confrontation, in the honest and clear way of an honest and clear ending. The ending was the right ending, and has been the right ending across the years since. Sophia's account I have not examined since the discovering's 2 days, which is the specific and honest accounting of the discovering's root, having been the complete picture's occasion, rather than the ongoing territory of the examining. And the not examining has been the right response to the discovering's root, having produced the complete picture in the 2 days, and the confrontation's honest account having been the complete picture's confirmation. And the suggested connection function I have had the specific and ambient relationship to, since the discovering that the discovering's root through the function had produced the relationship of someone who knows that the platform's algorithmic suggestion can produce the complete and immediate picture of the most significant and the most unexpected information through the most ordinary of the ordinary morning's online activities, and who moves through the platform's ordinary texture with the honest and ambient awareness of that knowledge. The awareness is not the anxiety, and is not the dramatic version of the changed relationship to the platform's ordinary function. It is the honest and ambient awareness of someone who has been inside the most ordinary form of the discovering's root, and who moves through the platform's ordinary texture with the specific and ambient relationship to the function's possibility that the honest and ambient awareness is the most accurate description of. The social media platform's suggested connection being the specific and reversed form of this discovering's root, and the semi-public documentation of the parallel being the most public and the most ordinary form of the complete pictures arriving, is what this story names in tonight's collection. The algorithmic suggestion being the accidental root of the most ordinary form of the complete pictures arriving through the most ordinary, of the ordinary morning's online activities is the specific and extraordinary quality of the most ordinary of all possible discovering forms, and the public form's additional weight being the specific dimension of this discovering that the private forms do not contain, is the honest account of what the most ordinary and of the most public form of the discovering produces that the private forms do not produce in the same ordinary and public way. The next story comes from a man who had been with his partner for 5 years and who discovered the infidelity in the specific and unusual form of discovering it through his own act of generosity. Through the specific and particular occasion of surprising his partner with an early return from a work trip that had been extended, and that he had shortened as the specific and deliberate expression of the genuine desire to be home sooner than the trip's extension had produced as the expected return. The early return had been the most generous available expression of the genuine desire to be home, and the early return's arrival had been the complete and immediate picture in the specific and extraordinary form of the most generous act, producing the most unwanted discovery. If her name was Elena, and the 5 years had been the genuine and developing thing of two people who were inside the serious and committed version of the relationship, the version that had been building the permanent and deliberate thing rather than the provisional and uncertain thing. And the work trip had been the ordinary work travel of the professional life that the 5 years had been the domestic context of alongside the professional life's demands. The trip had been a week's duration and had been extended by 2 days through the professional circumstances that work travel's extension is produced by. And the extension had been the ordinary and unremarkable production of the professional circumstances rather than the deliberate or the anticipated extension. I had shortened the extension. The shortening had been the specific and deliberate decision of someone who had been away from home for the extended period and who had found in the extended period's additional 2 days the genuine and concentrated desire to be home sooner than the extension had produced as the expected return. The shortening had required the specific and deliberate arrangements of the changed travel and the changed schedule, and the particular effort of the someone who is making the early return as the deliberate and generous expression of the genuine desire, and the particular effort had been inside the specific and genuine quality of the desire that had produced the effort as the honest expression. I had not told Elena about the shortening. The not telling had been the specific and deliberate decision to make the early return. The surprise, the generous surprise of the someone who is returning early, as the honest expression of the genuine desire to be home, and who is withholding the information of the early return to produce the surprise's specific and pleasurable quality. For the person, the early return is the expression of the genuine desire to be home to. The not telling had been the honest and generous withholding rather than the strategic or the suspicious withholding. I had not been withholding the information because of any specific suspicion or any specific concern. I had been withholding the information because the surprise's specific and pleasurable quality was the intended production of the not telling, and the intended production was the generous and honest expression of the genuine desire that the shortening had been the decision of. The early return arrived into the specific and ordinary form of the late afternoon's arrival at the door of the home that the 5 years had been the building of, and the door's opening had produced the complete and immediate picture in the specific and extraordinary form of the most generous act's most unwanted discovery. The complete and immediate picture was the complete and immediate picture in the way of the complete and immediate pictures that the other accounts in tonight's collection have described. Its and its specific form was the form that the early return's generous surprise had produced as the complete and immediate picture's most extraordinary root. The generosity's expression having been the root of the discovering, rather than the suspicion or the accumulation or the found evidence or the voluntary disclosure or any of the other routes that the discovering takes, when the discovering's route is not the specific and extraordinary route, of the most generous act's arrival, producing the complete and immediate picture. I want to describe the specific and concentrated quality of the complete and immediate picture's root, being the most generous act's arrival, because the root's specific quality is the thing that distinguishes this discovering from all of the other discoverings in tonight's collection, and that the years since have produced the clearest and the most demanding understanding of. The found evidence's root is the discovering through the accidental or the deliberate finding of the evidence that the parallel has produced. The voluntary disclosure's root is the discovering through the person inside the parallel's genuine and remorseful recognition that the disclosure is the honest response. The early returns route is the discovering through the most generous available expression of the genuine desire to be home, producing the complete and immediate picture as the arrival's specific and extraordinary production. The root's specific quality produces a specific and additional dimension of the discovering's weight that the other roots do not produce, which is the dimension of the generosity's cost. The generosity's cost is the specific and additional weight of the most generous act, having been the root of the most unwanted discovery. And the generosity's cost is the most personal and the most concentrated dimension of the early returns discovering, because it is the dimension that is organized around the specific and generous expression of the genuine desire having been the occasion for the discovering, rather than the deliberate or the accidental or the organized route of the other discoverings. The generosity's cost is the cost of the genuine desire's most generous expression, having produced the complete and immediate picture as its specific and extraordinary production, and the generosity's cost is held alongside the discovering's standard territory in the honest accounting of the early returns discovering. Elena's response to the early returns arrival had the specific and immediate quality of someone who is inside the complete and immediate picture's most concentrated and most exposed version. The exposure of the complete and immediate picture at the moment of the early returns arrival, rather than through the organized confrontation's more managed form, and the exposure's most concentrated and most immediate quality, was the specific and extraordinary production of the early return's most generous act, having been the discovering's root. The exposure was total and was the honest and undeniable form of the complete and immediate picture's most exposed version, and the exposure's total and undeniable quality produced the specific and immediate account of the parallel that of the exposure's most concentrated form makes available without the organized confrontation's more deliberate form being required. The parallel had been with a man named Sebastian and had been running for 6 months of the 5 years. The 6 months' honest account was the complete picture that the early returns arrival had been the root of, and the 6 months' account was the honest and complete version that the total and undeniable exposure's most concentrated form had produced without the organized confrontation's more deliberate form being required. Sebastian had been the specific and particular person of the 6 months alongside the 5 years, and the 6 months had been running in the specific and established form of a parallel that had been inside the 5 years' daily life, in the ordinary way of the established parallel's ordinary presence in the daily life of the person carrying it. I left the relationship in the weeks following the early return's arrival. The leaving was the honest and clear conclusion of the genuine and immediate understanding that the early return's complete and immediate picture had produced. And the leaving was the right leaving, and has been the right leaving across the years since. The generosity's cost has been the specific and ongoing dimension of the early return's discovering that the years since have produced the most demanding understanding of, not the discovering itself, which is the standard territory and the concluded thing, but the specific and additional weight of the most generous acts, having been the discovering's root, which is the non-standard territory and the ongoing thing. The generosity's cost is held in the honest accounting of the 5 years without the cost's specific and additional weight being the bitterness that the cost could produce if the honest accounting were not the commitment of the holding, The honest accounting of the generosity's cost is the specific and important work that the years since the early return have required of me. The work of holding the genuine desire's most generous expression, having been the discovering's root without the holding producing the specific and corrosive version of the cost's additional weight that would prevent the genuine desire's most generous expression from being the available and honest expression of the genuine desire and the subsequent relationships that the years since have been the development of. The genuine desire's most generous expression being available in the subsequent relationships as the available and honest expression rather than the unavailable and guarded expression is the specific and important work that the early return's discovering has required and that the years since have been the doing of. The early return's generosity being the specific and extraordinary root of this discovering, and the generosity's cost being the specific and additional weight of the most generous act, having been the discovering's occasion, rather than the deliberate or the accidental or the organized root, is what this story names as the final individual story in tonight's collection. The honest accounting of the generosity's cost, without the cost producing the bitterness that would prevent the genuine desire's most generous expression from being available in the subsequent relationships, is the specific and important work that this account has been naming, and the naming has been in the honest form of the inside account of the generosity's costs, specific and additional weight alongside the discovering's standard territory. The last story tonight is brief, and it belongs to a woman who asked that her account be the briefest in the collection, not because the account is less significant than the others, but because she has found in the years since the discovering that the briefest honest account of the most significant things is often the most honest available account, and that the length that the other accounts have required is not the length that her account requires to be honest. We were together for 9 years. He was unfaithful for the last 4 of them. I did not know for the last 4 of them, and I found out in the 9th year through the specific and ordinary form of the found evidence and the confrontation that the found evidence required. I want to say 2 things about the 9 years and the 4 years, honestly, and then I want to say the specific and important thing that the years since have produced the clearest understanding of. The first thing is that the 9 years were real. The 9 years were the genuine and present and invested thing that I understood them to be. Genuinely good in the ways that the genuinely good relationship is good. And the 4 years of the parallel running alongside the last 4 of the 9 does not change the genuine and present quality of the 9 years in the honest accounting of them. The 9 years are held as the genuine and present thing they were, and the 4 years are held as the 4 years they were, and both are held simultaneously without either canceling the other in the honest accounting. The second thing is that the ending was the right ending. I have examined this in every available form across the years since the 9th year, and the examination has produced the same conclusion each time, which is that the ending was the right ending, and that the right ending is the clearest and the most settled thing the years since have produced. The specific and important thing the years since have produced the clearest understanding of is this: the 4 years of not knowing were not the 4 years of being deceived in the way that the dramatic account of the discovering would have them be. They were also the 4 years of living the genuine 9 years relationship in the specific and present way that the genuine 9 years relationship was lived, and the living of the genuine thing was real, and was the honest experience of the time, regardless of what was running alongside it. The not knowing was the condition of the living, and the living was real. And the real quality of the living is held alongside the 4 years of the parallel and the honest accounting, without the 4 years parallel, replacing the real quality of the living as the account of what the 4 years were from the inside of the living. The years since the 9th year have been the years of the real quality of the living, being held alongside the 4 years of the parallel, in the honest and simultaneous form of the both things true, which is the most honest available relationship to the 9 years that the 9 years have required, and that the years since have been the doing of. That is the both things true. That is where I leave it. Those are tonight's stories. The collection that tonight has been the collection of the specific and particular and genuine experiences of the specific and particular and genuine people who lived them and who have provided the honest accounting of what the living was and what the discovering produced and what the years following the discovering have been the working through of. Every account in tonight's collection has been the honest account rather than the simple account, and the honest account has required the length and the specificity and the precision that the honest account of a genuine and significant human experience requires to be honest rather than simplified. What the collection holds together is the specific and important understanding that the discovering of a betrayal inside a significant relationship is not the single and simple event that the dramatic account of it makes it. It is the beginning of the most significant and the most demanding interior work that the discovering produces in the person who is inside it. And the work is the ongoing and continuous engagement with the honest accounting of what the relationship was and what the discovering changed and what the years following the discovering require of the person who is now outside the relationship and inside the accounting of it. Every person in tonight's collection has been doing that work in the specific and individual way that their particular account has required. And the specific and individual ways have been as various and as genuine as the specific and individual people whose accounts they are. The continuation and the ending have both been the right responses in their respective accounts. And the right response is not the universal right response, but the specific and particular right response of the specific and particular person to the specific and particular honest accounting of the specific and particular relationship that the discovering had reorganized. The honest accounting is the work, and the work is the specific and individual thing of each person, rather than the universal and prescribed thing of the dramatic account's verdict. The honest accounting is never finished, and it continues across the years in the specific and ongoing form of the relationship to the past that the honest accounting requires, not the resolved and settled account that the resolved and settled account would provide if the resolved and settled account were the honest one, but the ongoing and developing account of someone who is holding the relationship's full and genuine complexity without the simplification that the dramatic account's verdict provides. The full and genuine complexity is the most honest available relationship to the significant relationships of the adult life, and the full and genuine complexity is what tonight's collection has been doing across all of the hours of these accounts. Now go and rest, and you have been with these stories for a long time tonight, and the stories are real, and they have weight, and the weight deserves the rest that follows the carrying of it. The rest is the specific and honest response to the weight of tonight's accounts, not the dismissal of the weight, but the genuine rest that the weight's honest carrying requires, before the next thing that the rest returns you to. Whatever that next thing is for you tonight, it is the thing that exists outside of these accounts and beyond this space, and the rest will return you to it in the specific and honest way. That rest always returns the person who genuinely rests to the life that the rest is the preparation for. Good night. I will be here when you come back.